Hey friends, welcome to the Horror Sleep. Almost 90% of you watching aren't subscribed. If you enjoy these true park ranger horror stories, hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps the channel. Oh, and where are you watching from tonight? Let me know in the comments. My name is Hank Reddick, and I worked as a law enforcement officer in the Backcountry National Forest in northwestern Alabama for 11 years. 3 years ago, I was forced to retire following an incident that the department officially classified as a stress-related incident. But anyone who knows the truth understands that this is just bureaucratic language used to describe something they don't want to put in writing. 3 months ago, I came across your channel in the middle of the night and, listening to your stories about park rangers, I realized you understood something most people don't. Forests aren't bad, but they are more honest than civilization could ever be. They don't play roles for you, they don't lie. And sometimes this honesty causes things that should remain hidden to come to light. I'm telling this story now because I need someone who doesn't jump to conclusions or try to explain things with easy answers to listen. My wife knows some parts of it, but I never told her everything. How could I? How can you explain to someone who has never spent a night alone in a 200,000-acre forest what silence is really like, or what it means when that silence is broken in an illogical way? Before I get into what happened that October, you need to understand the Bankhead. It's not like your western forests with their grand vistas and tourist overlooks. The Bankhead is old, dense, and it doesn't give up its secrets easily. We're talking about longleaf pine forests so thick in places that you can't see 20 feet in any direction. Creek bottoms choked with palmetto and mountain laurel. Limestone bluffs riddled with caves that connect to God knows where. And in the fall, when the canopy thins out just enough to let the moonlight through, it creates these shadows that seem to move even when there's no wind. The forest covers parts of 4 counties, but my jurisdiction was primarily the western section near the Sipsey Wilderness. We had a small ranger station off Highway 33, and during the off-season, it was usually just me and my partner Tucker Briggs working the overnight shifts. Tucker was 26 at the time, fresh out of the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, still had that enthusiasm that hadn't been worn down by years of finding illegal camps and dealing with drunk hunters. Good kid, smart. The kind of guy who'd actually read the field manuals and could tell you the difference between a cottonmouth and a water snake from 50 feet away. It was late October, right at the tail end of camping season. The weather had turned cold enough to keep most of the casual visitors away, but not so cold that the hardcore campers had packed it in yet. We'd get maybe a dozen groups over a weekend, mostly along the developed sites near the Sipsey River. But there were always a few who'd venture deeper, looking for that genuine wilderness experience away from the designated campgrounds. I was on evening patrol that Thursday, had just finished checking permits down at Brushy Creek, when dispatch radioed in about a possible illegal campfire near the old logging road that runs parallel to Hubbard Creek. Somebody had called it in from one of the overlooks, said they could see smoke but no vehicles in the area. This wasn't unusual. We'd get plenty of people who'd hike in, set up camp without permits, and hope we wouldn't notice. Usually, they were cooperative once you found them, just folks who didn't realize or didn't care about the regulations. I radioed Tucker, who was about 20 minutes south of my position, and told him I was going to check it out. He offered to head my way, but I told him not to bother. Like I said, it was routine. I'd done the same thing probably 200 times before. I'd find the camp, check for permits, maybe write a citation if they were being difficult, and that would be that. The logging road Tucker and I used to access that area hadn't been maintained in probably 15 years. It was more of a path now, barely wide enough for my truck, with branches scraping both sides as I drove. The sun was already setting, painting the pine trunks orange and making the shadows between them look deeper than they should. I had my windows down, listening. That's something you learn early on as a ranger. You listen before you see. The forest tells you things if you're paying attention. I parked about half a mile from where the smoke had been spotted, killed the engine, and just sat there for a minute with my windows still down. October in Alabama means the crickets are still active, and you should hear them everywhere, this constant background hum. I heard them. I also heard a few crows settling in for the night and the distant sound of Hubbard Creek running over rocks. Normal sounds. Everything was normal. I grabbed my flashlight even though there was still enough daylight left, checked that my radio was on the right channel, and started walking. The trail from the old logging road down to the creek wasn't marked, but I'd been down it enough times to know the way. You follow a ridge line for about 200 yards, then drop down into a hollow where the pine gives way to hardwood. That's where people like to camp because there's a flat area right above the creek that's perfect for pitching tents. As I got closer, I could smell it. Wood smoke. The distinct smell of pine burning, which meant whoever was down there was using deadfall. That was actually a good sign. It meant they weren't cutting live trees. I could also smell something else underneath the smoke. Damp leaves, fresh earth, that mineral smell you get near running water. But I couldn't hear anything, no voices, no movement, just the creek and my own footsteps on the trail. I came around a bend in the trail where it drops down the last slope before reaching the flat area, and that's when I saw the fire. It was burning in the center of a small clearing, maybe 30 feet from the creek bank. The flames were low but steady, and the wood was arranged in a neat teepee formation, the kind of fire someone builds when they know what they're doing. But there was no tent, no gear, no sign of anyone camping at all. I stopped at the edge of the clearing and called out, "Forest Service, anyone here?" Nothing. "This is Park Ranger Reddick. If you're in the area, I need you to make yourself known." Still nothing, just the fire crackling and the creek running. I approached slowly, keeping my flashlight in my left hand and my right hand near my sidearm. Not because I was expecting trouble, but because that's what you do. You don't take chances in the woods, even when everything seems calm. The fire was burning clean. No trash in it, no food wrappers, nothing but wood. Good, dry pine that someone had taken the time to collect and arrange properly. Around the fire, the ground was clear. No footprints in the soft earth, no disturbed leaves, no indication that anyone had been sitting there. That's when I noticed the sticks. Around the perimeter of the fire, maybe 3 feet back from the flames, someone had arranged a circle of sticks. Not thrown randomly, but placed deliberately. Each stick was about the length of my forearm, and they were spaced evenly, 12 of them in total, all pointing toward the fire like the spokes of a wheel. I've seen a lot of strange things in the woods. People leave offerings sometimes, especially near the older parts of the forest. Religious groups will hold ceremonies. Kids will build fairy circles or leave rock cairns. But something about this felt different. The precision of it, the isolation of the location, and most of all the complete absence of any human sign except for the fire itself and these arranged sticks. I used my flashlight to scan the surrounding trees. The sun had set while I was walking down, and the forest was shifting into that twilight state where shapes become uncertain. No tents, no backpacks hanging from branches, no rope lines for food storage. I circled the fire slowly, looking for tracks. The ground around the clearing was a mix of pine needles and fallen leaves, not great for holding prints, but you should still be able to see signs of disturbance where someone had walked. I found them, finally, on the north side of the clearing. Boot prints, looked like a men's size 10 or 11, with a distinctive tread pattern. Work boots, probably, the kind with deep lugs. The prints led from the clearing toward the creek, and I followed them with my flashlight beam. They went right to the edge of the water, where the bank dropped about 2 feet down to the creek bed. And that's where they stopped. Not cross the creek, not turned, and followed the bank. Just stopped. Like whoever had made them had walked to the water's edge and vanished. I stood there at the creek bank for probably 5 minutes, shining my light across the water and downstream both ways. Hubbard Creek runs about 15 feet wide in that section, shallow enough to cross easily, but there were no prints on the opposite bank. No disturbed rocks in the water. Nothing. The sun was completely gone now, and the temperature was dropping fast. My breath was starting to fog in the beam of my flashlight. I radioed Tucker, told him what I'd found, asked him to head my way after all. He acknowledged and said he'd be there in 15. I went back to the fire. It was still burning steadily, and I realized that whoever had built it had done so maybe 30 to 40 minutes earlier. The wood was about halfway consumed, burning down evenly, which meant they'd been here recently. Maybe even while I was parking the truck and walking in. That thought bothered me more than it should have. I looked at those arranged sticks again. In the firelight, they cast long shadows across the cleared ground, and for a moment I had this strange thought that they looked like they were reaching toward something, or away from something. I couldn't tell which. The forest around me had gone quiet. I realized I couldn't hear the crickets anymore. The creek was still running, but even that seemed muted somehow, like I was in a pocket of silence that had settled over just this one spot. I've spent enough time alone in the woods to know what real isolation feels like. It's not scary, not usually. It's just a fact. You're alone. The forest is big, and you're small. But this felt different. This felt like I wasn't alone at all. This felt like I was being watched by something that was very, very patient. I heard Tucker's truck before I saw his headlights coming through the trees. The sound broke whatever spell had settled over me, and the forest sounds started to come back. Crickets, a few late-season frogs down by the creek, an owl calling from somewhere deeper in the woods. Tucker came down the trail with his flashlight bobbing, and I was surprised at how relieved I felt to see him. When he reached the clearing, he stopped and looked at the fire, then at me. "No campers?" he asked. "No," I said, "no anything." He walked to the fire, studied it the same way I had, then noticed the sticks. "What's that about?" "Don't know." He circled the clearing like I had, found the prints where I'd found them, followed them to the creek. When he came back, he had this expression on his face that I recognized. He was trying to logic his way through something that didn't make logical sense. "Maybe they swam downstream," he offered. "In 40-degree water, in October, without any gear?" Tucker didn't answer. He knew as well as I did that it didn't make sense. "We should put this fire out," I said. "Make sure nobody starts a forest fire." We used our boots to scatter the wood, then poured water from my canteen over the embers. As the fire died and the darkness rushed in to fill the space where the light had been, I felt that sensation again. Like something was watching us from just beyond the reach of our flashlights. Tucker felt it too. I could tell by the way he kept turning, scanning the tree line. "We should mark this location," he said. "Document it. Maybe someone will come back." I nodded. We took photos, noted the GPS coordinates, collected one of the sticks as evidence, though I wasn't sure evidence of what. Then we hiked back to our trucks together. Neither of us suggested splitting up, and neither of us commented on that fact. That was Thursday night. By Friday, I'd almost convinced myself there was a rational explanation. Someone had built a fire, changed their mind about camping, and left. The stick arrangement was just boredom or some kind of personal ritual. The footprints ended at the creek because they'd stepped on rocks I couldn't see in the dark. Everything had an explanation if you looked hard enough. Friday evening, I was assigned to patrol the eastern section of the forest, away from Hubbard Creek. Tucker had the western section. Around 9:30, my radio crackled to life. "Hank, you there?" Tucker's voice sounded strange, tight. "Yeah, what's up?" "I'm at Hubbard Creek, same spot from last night." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "You found something?" There was a long pause, filled with static. "The fire's burning again," Tucker said. "Same spot, same arrangement, like we never touched it." I told Tucker to stay put, that I'd be there in 30 minutes. He didn't argue, and I heard something in his voice that made me push my truck harder than I should have on those dirt roads. The reality was, it took me 45 minutes to reach the old logging road turnoff, and another 10 to hike down to the creek. Tucker was standing at the edge of the clearing with his flashlight off when I arrived. He gestured for me to do the same, and we stood there in the darkness with just the firelight illuminating the scene. It was exactly as he'd described. The fire was burning in precisely the same spot, built in the same teepee formation, with the same 12 sticks arranged in a circle around it. The wood looked fresh, not like someone had just relit yesterday's fire. This was newly gathered deadfall, carefully arranged. "I've been watching it for 20 minutes, Tucker said quietly. "Nobody's come back." "You check for prints?" "Same as yesterday, leading from the clearing to the creek, stopping at the water." We stood there without speaking for a long moment. The fire crackled softly, and somewhere downstream I heard an animal moving through the undergrowth. Something small, probably a raccoon heading down to the water. "Tucker," I said finally, "tell me what you're thinking." He took a breath. "I'm thinking someone is messing with us. They saw us yesterday, watched us put out the fire, and now they're back to prove they can be here without us knowing." "That would mean they've been out here for 2 days, I pointed out. "In October, with no tent, no visible camp, no vehicle. People have done stranger things." He was right about that. I'd dealt with my share of eccentric hikers and survivalist types who prided themselves on living rough. But this still felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. "Let's search the area," I said. "Wider perimeter this time. If someone's camping nearby, we'll find evidence." We split up, which in retrospect was probably stupid, but it felt necessary. Tucker took the north side of the creek, working upstream. I took the south side, moving downstream. We stayed in radio contact, checking in every few minutes. The forest was different at night. During the day, even the densest parts of the bankhead feel manageable. You can see the sun filtering through the canopy, hear the birds, orient yourself by familiar landmarks. At night, with just a flashlight beam to guide you, the same forest becomes a maze of shadows and uncertain footing. Every fallen log could trip you. Every low-hanging branch could catch you across the face. I worked slowly, scanning the ground and the surrounding trees. I was looking for anything that indicated human presence. A footprint, a broken branch at shoulder height, a candy wrapper, anything. What I found was nothing. The forest floor was undisturbed. No trails except for the game paths carved by deer and wild pigs. No trash, no food cache hanging from trees, no rope marks where someone might have set up a hammock. It was pristine, like no human had walked through here in years. After 30 minutes, I radioed Tucker. "You got anything?" "Nothing, not even old fire rings," heading back to the clearing. I was about 200 yards downstream from the fire when I stopped. I'd heard something, not an animal sound, and not Tucker on his side of the creek. This was something else. A scraping sound, like wood on wood, coming from back toward the clearing. "Tucker, you hear that?" "Hear what?" The sound stopped. I waited. My flashlight pointed back the way I'd come, listening so hard my ears started to create phantom noises from the silence. "Never mind," I said, "on my way back." I turned to retrace my steps and realized I couldn't see the firelight anymore. The forest had closed in around me while I'd been walking, and the clearing was blocked from view by the terrain. I followed my own path back, using the disturbed leaves as a guide. When I reached the clearing, Tucker was standing exactly where I'd left him, but he'd turned off his flashlight again. He had his hand raised, gesturing for me to be quiet. I stopped at the tree line, killed my light, and listened. At first, I didn't hear anything except the fire in the creek. Then I caught it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps somewhere in the darkness to the north. Not running, not sneaking, just walking at a steady pace through the forest. Tucker's hand went to his sidearm, not drawing it but resting on the grip. I did the same. The footsteps stopped. In the firelight, I could see Tucker's face clearly. He was tracking something with his eyes, following some movement I couldn't see from where I was standing. Then I saw it too. There was someone standing in the trees about 50 feet from the clearing. Just standing there, visible only as a darker shape against the dark forest. No flashlight, no movement, just standing. "Forest Service," Tucker called out, his voice level and professional. "We need you to step into the light and identify yourself." The figure didn't move. "Sir, this is federal property. I'm ordering you to step forward and show me your hands." Nothing. The shape remained motionless. I moved to my left, trying to get a better angle, trying to see any detail that might tell me if this person was armed or what they were doing. As I moved, my boot came down on a dry branch, and the crack echoed through the clearing. The figure turned its head toward me. I couldn't see its face, couldn't see any features at all, but I knew it was looking directly at me. Tucker drew his weapon, held it in a low ready position. "Last warning. Step forward now." The figure took one step back, melting deeper into the shadows. Then another step. Then it was gone, vanished into the darkness so completely that I couldn't tell if it had moved away or simply disappeared. Tucker and I both had our flashlights on now, both sweeping the tree line where the figure had been. Our beams crossed and recrossed, illuminating trunks and undergrowth, but nothing else. "You saw that, right?" Tucker asked. "Yeah, I saw it." "What the hell was that?" I didn't answer because I didn't know. A person, obviously. But something about the way it had moved or hadn't moved felt fundamentally wrong. Like it had been testing us, seeing what we would do. We approached the spot where it had been standing, our lights and weapons both up now. The ground there showed no signs of disturbance. No footprints, no broken twigs, nothing to indicate anyone had been standing there at all. "This is insane," Tucker said. "People don't just vanish. There have to be tracks." But there weren't. We searched the area for another hour, methodically covering every square foot within 100 yards of where we'd seen the figure. We found deer tracks, raccoon prints, even what looked like a bobcat trail, but nothing human except for the same boot prints leading from the fire to the creek. Eventually, we gave up. We extinguished the fire again, collected another stick from the circle, and hiked back to our trucks. The whole way out, I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see that shape standing in the trees behind us. But if it was there, it stayed hidden. Back at the ranger station, we filed an incident report. I wrote everything down exactly as it had happened, and Tucker did the same. Our supervisor, a guy named Dennison, who'd been with the Forest Service for 25 years, read both reports and then looked at us like we'd lost our minds. "You're telling me someone is hiking into the forest every night, building an identical fire, and then vanishing without leaving any tracks except one set that goes into the water?" "That's what we're seeing," I confirmed. "And when you confronted this person, they just disappeared." "Into the trees. Yeah." Dennison leaned back in his chair. "You think this is someone playing games? I don't know what else it could be." He thought about it for a long moment. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. Tomorrow night, Saturday, we'll set up a proper stakeout. If someone's coming back to that spot, we'll catch them in the act. I'll authorize overtime for both of you, and we'll bring in Melissa from the North Station as backup. Melissa Cartwright was one of our wildlife officers, good at her job, completely unflappable. If we were going to spend Saturday night sitting in the dark woods waiting for a mystery person to show up, it helped to have someone like her along. That night, I barely slept. I kept seeing that shape in the trees, the way it had stood so perfectly still, the way it had turned its head toward me when I'd stepped on that branch. There was something about the movement that felt off, too smooth, too deliberate, like it had known I was going to step there before I did. Saturday morning, I drove back out to Hubbard Creek alone. I told myself I was just checking the area in daylight, documenting the scene properly. But really, I needed to see it when it wasn't dark and threatening. I needed to convince myself that it was just a clearing in the woods, nothing more. The fire was cold and scattered from where Tucker and I had kicked it apart. The sticks we'd left were still on the ground, no longer in their careful circle. Everything looked mundane in the October sunlight. Just a spot where someone had built a fire, nothing sinister about it. I walked the entire perimeter again, looking for anything we might have missed in the dark. I found the boot prints again, followed them to the creek, and confirmed what I already knew. They stopped at the water with no continuation on the other side. I stood at the creek bank for a long time, just listening to the water run. The forest was full of sounds in daylight. Birds calling, squirrels chattering in the trees, the wind moving through the pine boughs. Normal sounds, comforting sounds. But underneath all of that, I felt like I was being watched again. That same sensation from Thursday night, like something was out there in the trees, observing me with an intelligence I couldn't fathom. I turned slowly, scanning the forest. Nothing, just trees and shadows, and the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy. "If you're out here," I said aloud, feeling foolish even as I did it, "I need you to know that you're trespassing on federal property. You need to pack up whatever camp you have and leave. This is your only warning." The forest offered no response. I waited for another minute, then hiked back to my truck. That evening, Tucker, Melissa, and I met at the ranger station to plan our approach. Dennison was there too, though he made it clear he thought we were wasting resources on what was probably just some eccentric hiker. "You three will set up positions around the clearing," he said, pointing to a topographical map spread across the table. "Melissa, you take the eastern approach. That gives you a view of the fire pit and the trail leading in. Tucker, you're on the west side, covering the creek. Hank, you're north, blocking the most likely exit route if someone runs." "What if they don't show?" Melissa asked. "Then you sit there until 0300 and then pack it in," Dennison said. "But if they do show, I want detailed documentation. Photos, video if possible, and if you can make contact safely, you approach and ID them. If they run, you pursue, but do not engage in anything dangerous. This isn't worth anyone getting hurt over." We drove out separately, parking our vehicles at different points along the old logging road to avoid clustering. The plan was to be in position by 2000 hours, just after sunset, and to maintain radio silence unless we saw something. I reached my position north of the clearing at 1945, while there was still enough light to navigate without a flashlight. I'd chosen a spot about 75 yards from the fire pit, behind a fallen pine that gave me good cover while still allowing me a clear line of sight to the clearing. As the last of the daylight faded, I watched the fire pit through my night vision monocular. It was just a circle of cold stones and scattered ash. No movement. No fire. Nothing. 2000 hours came and went. The forest settled into its night rhythms. I heard an owl hunting somewhere to my west. its wings cutting silently through the air. A few bats emerged, their echolocation clicks audible in the quiet. 2100. Still nothing. At 21:30, Melissa broke radio silence with a whisper. Movement, southeast of my position. Something's coming. I adjusted my position, peering through the monocular toward the clearing. At first, I saw nothing. Then I caught it. A shape moving through the trees, heading directly for the fire pit. I see it, Tucker confirmed, coming in from Melissa's side. The shape emerged into the clearing, and even through night vision I could see it was a person. Average height, wearing what looked like a dark jacket and pants. Moving with purpose but not hurrying. They went straight to the fire pit and knelt down. I watched as they began arranging wood, building that same teepee formation I'd seen twice before. They worked quickly, efficiently, like someone who'd done this many times. Wait for my signal, I whispered into the radio. Let them finish. I want to see what they do with those sticks. The figure completed the fire structure and produced something from their pocket. A lighter or matches, I couldn't tell which. The fire caught, flames spreading quickly through the dry pine. Then they stood and walked to the perimeter of the clearing. From what appeared to be a small bag, they removed the sticks one by one, placing them in that perfect circle around the fire. 12 sticks, evenly spaced, all pointing inward. When they finished, they stood at the edge of the firelight for a long moment, perfectly still. Just standing there, looking at what they'd created. Now, I said. All three of us activated our flashlights simultaneously, beams converging on the figure from 3 different directions. They froze, caught in the light. Forest Service, I called out. Don't move. We need to talk to you. I approached from my position, Tucker and Melissa doing the same from theirs. As we got closer, I could see more detail. The person was wearing a dark green jacket, the kind hunters wear, work boots, jeans. Their hands were at their sides, empty, but I still couldn't see their face. They had a hood pulled up and were keeping their head down. Sir, I need you to pull back that hood and show me your hands, I said. The figure didn't comply, didn't move at all. This is your last warning. Show me your hands and your face. Slowly, very slowly, the figure raised its hands. They were wearing gloves. Dark gloves that made their hands almost invisible in the shadowy light between our flashlight beams. The hood, Tucker said. Take it off. The figure reached up with both hands and pulled back the hood. But what I saw underneath made no sense. They were wearing a mask. A simple black ski mask that covered their entire face except for their eyes, which reflected our flashlight beams like an animal's. Take off the mask, I ordered. The figure's hands went to the bottom of the mask as if to comply. But then they did something I didn't expect. Their hands moved in a blur, too fast to track, and suddenly they were holding something. Something metallic that caught the firelight. Weapon! Melissa shouted. All 3 of our guns came up, pointed at center mass, but the figure didn't point whatever they were holding at us. Instead, they held it up above their head with both hands, like an offering. It was a knife. A fixed blade hunting knife with about a 7-inch blade. Drop it, I commanded. Drop the knife now! The figure tilted their head, like they were considering the request. Then, with the same deliberate slowness they'd shown when removing the hood, they bent down and placed the knife on the ground at their feet. When they straightened up, their hands were empty again. Turn around, I said. Hands on your head. You're being detained. The figure didn't turn around. Instead, they took 1 step backward toward the fire. Don't move, Tucker warned. Another step backward. The figure was now just a few feet from the fire, the flames casting their shadow long across the clearing. We will use force if necessary, Melissa said. The figure took one more step backward and was now standing directly in front of the fire. The heat must have been intense at that distance, but they didn't react to it at all. And then they did something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. They stepped backward into the fire. I mean that literally. They stepped backward into the flames and disappeared. Not fell, not stumbled, not dove to one side. They stepped back into the fire and were gone, as completely as if they'd walked through a door. All three of us rushed forward, but there was nothing. The fire was still burning, the wood arranged in its careful teepee, but there was no one in it, no one behind it, no one anywhere in the clearing except the three of us. The knife was still on the ground where they'd placed it. I picked it up with my gloved hand, examining it in my flashlight beam. It was a standard hunting knife, nothing special about it. The blade was clean, recently sharpened. The handle was wood, worn smooth from use. "Where did they go?" Melissa asked, her voice shaking slightly. "Where the hell did they go?" Tucker was already searching the clearing, his flashlight beam swinging wildly from the fire pit to the tree line and back. "They have to be here. People don't just vanish." But they did. We searched for 2 hours. We covered every inch of the clearing, every possible exit route. We found nothing. No footprints leading away, no disturbed brush, no sign that anyone had been there except for the fire and the knife and our own presence. At 0100 hours, we gave up and regrouped at the ranger station. Dennison was there, waiting for our report. When we told him what we'd seen, he listened without interrupting, his expression growing more skeptical with each detail. "You're telling me this person walked into a fire and disappeared," he said when we finished. "That's what we saw," I confirmed. "All three of you?" Melissa and Tucker both nodded. Dennison rubbed his face. "Okay, let me see the knife." I handed over the evidence bag containing the knife. He examined it under the desk lamp, turning it over in his hands. "Standard buck knife," he said. "Probably bought at any sporting goods store in the state. No serial number filed off, no identifying marks." He set it down and looked at the three of us. "You realize how this sounds?" "We know how it sounds," Tucker said. "But it's what happened. People don't walk into fires and disappear, Tucker. That's not possible." "Then explain the knife," Melissa challenged. "Explain the fire. Explain how they vanished with all three of us watching." Dennison didn't have an answer for that. None of us did. Sunday morning, I drove back to Hubbard Creek alone. I didn't tell anyone I was going, didn't log it in the duty roster. I just needed to see the place one more time in daylight. Needed to try to make sense of what I'd witnessed. The clearing looked different in the morning sun. Peaceful, almost. The fire had burned out sometime during the night, leaving only ash and charred wood. The sticks that had been arranged in their careful circle were scattered now, kicked aside when we'd searched the area. I stood exactly where the figure had been standing when they'd placed the knife on the ground. From this position, I could see the fire pit directly ahead, the creek bank to my right, and the forest stretching away in all other directions. If you were going to run, this would be a terrible place to start. The figure would have been visible for at least a few seconds, no matter which direction they chose. But they hadn't run. They'd stepped backward into the fire and ceased to exist. I walked around the fire pit, studying it from every angle. There were no trapdoors, no hidden holes, no clever tricks that could explain what we'd seen. Just cold ash on bare ground. The boot prints were still there, leading from the clearing to the creek. I followed them again, and again they stopped at the water's edge. I crossed the creek this time, wading through the cold water until I reached the opposite bank. I searched for matching prints, for any sign that someone had exited the water on this side. Nothing. I sat on a rock by the creek and tried to think it through logically. 3 trained law enforcement officers had witnessed the same thing. We'd all seen the figures step into the fire. We'd all seen them disappear. Our testimony was consistent, our observations clear. But what we'd seen was impossible, unless it wasn't. I'd spent enough time in the woods to know that the line between possible and impossible sometimes gets blurry. I'd seen things I couldn't explain, heard things that made no sense. The forest kept its secrets, and sometimes those secrets leaked out in ways that challenged what you thought you knew about reality. But this was different. This wasn't strange lights or unexplained sounds. This was a person who could apparently violate the laws of physics. And that thought terrified me more than I wanted to admit. My phone buzzed. Text from Tucker. Meeting at station, 1400 hours. Mandatory. I checked my watch. It was just past 11. I had time to search the area a bit more. Maybe walk the perimeter one more time. Instead, I found myself talking to the empty clearing. "I don't know what you are," I said aloud. "I don't know what you want. But whatever game you're playing, it's over. We've documented everything. We have your knife. If you come back here, we'll be ready." The forest didn't respond. The creek kept running. Birds kept singing in the trees, and nothing about the scene suggested anything supernatural or threatening. But I felt it again. That sensation of being watched, of something in the trees paying very close attention to what I was saying. I left quickly after that, practically jogging back up the trail to where I'd parked my truck. The meeting at the station that afternoon involved not just Dennison, but also 2 special agents from the FBI's Birmingham field office. Apparently, Dennison had been required to report our incident to federal authorities because of the unusual nature of the encounter and the fact that the subject had been armed. The agents, a man and woman whose names I've forgotten, listened to our statements separately and then together. They asked detailed questions about the timeline, about what we'd seen, about our mental states before and during the encounter. They were professional but skeptical, the way law enforcement gets when a story sounds too strange to be believed. After 3 hours of interviews, they let us go with instructions not to discuss the incident with anyone outside the investigation. "Do you believe us?" I asked the male agent as we were finishing up. He considered the question carefully. "I believe you believe what you're telling me, whether that's the same as what actually happened." He shrugged. "We'll be conducting our own investigation. If we find anything relevant, we'll let your supervisor know." That was Sunday. By Monday, the FBI had set up their own surveillance of the clearing, using trail cameras and other equipment that was more sophisticated than anything we had access to. They monitored the site for 5 consecutive nights. Nothing happened. No fires were built, no mysterious figures appeared, no strange tracks materialized in the dirt. By the following Monday, they packed up their equipment and closed their investigation. Official conclusion: person or persons unknown had been engaging in unusual but not necessarily illegal activity and had ceased once they became aware of law enforcement presence. The knife was returned to us with no useful forensic evidence. No prints, no DNA, nothing that could help identify who had been holding it. And that should have been the end of it. The weird case of the disappearing fire builder, filed away as unsolved and likely unsolvable. Tucker and Melissa and I would have gone back to our regular duties, and eventually the whole thing would have faded into the category of strange but inexplicable events. But it wasn't the end. 3 weeks after our encounter, on a cold Thursday in November, I was alone on evening patrol. Tucker had called in sick, and Melissa was covering the northern section. I'd deliberately avoided Hubbard Creek since the FBI left, but the road I was assigned that night took me close to the old logging road. As I drove past, I noticed something. Tire tracks, fresh ones, leading down the overgrown path. Someone had driven in there recently, within the last few hours. I should have called for backup. That was protocol. But something about those tire tracks pulled at me, demanded that I investigate. I followed them down the old logging road, my truck's headlights illuminating the narrow path. The tracks led all the way to where I usually parked, then stopped. Someone's vehicle was there now, a dark blue pickup I didn't recognize, pulled off to the side. I parked behind it, blocking it in. I ran the plates through my computer, registered to a Paul Whitmore, address in Jasper, about 40 miles south. No warrants, no record. I radioed my position and the plate number to dispatch, then got out and approached the vehicle. It was empty, no one in the cab, no camping gear visible in the bed. But the engine was still warm. The trail down to the clearing was obvious in my flashlight beam. Someone had walked down it recently, disturbing the leaves and breaking small branches. I followed the trail, my hand on my weapon, moving slowly and listening for any sound ahead. As I got closer to the creek, I smelled it. Smoke. Wood smoke. Someone had built another fire. I approached more carefully this time, staying off the main trail and moving through the trees to get a better angle of approach. When I could see the clearing, I stopped and observed. There was a man sitting by the fire, just sitting there staring into the flames. He was older, maybe mid-50s, with gray hair and a worn jacket. His face was visible in the firelight, and he looked tired. Not threatening, not mysterious, just tired. Around the fire, in that now familiar circle, someone had arranged 12 sticks pointing inward. I watched him for several minutes. He didn't move except to occasionally poke at the fire with a branch. He wasn't doing anything illegal, wasn't hurting anyone. But he was here, at this specific spot, and that couldn't be coincidence. I stepped into the clearing, my flashlight pointed down, trying not to startle him. "Evening," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Forest Service." He looked up at me without surprise, like he'd been expecting me. "Evening, Ranger. Mind if I ask what you're doing out here?" "Sitting by a fire." He gestured to the space across from him. "You're welcome to join me if you'd like." I didn't sit. This is kind of an unusual spot for a campfire. No tent, no gear. "You camping nearby?" "No," he said. "Just needed to be here tonight." "Why tonight specifically?" He studied me for a long moment. "You're the one who's been finding the fires, aren't you? You and your partners." My hand moved closer to my weapon. "How do you know about that?" "Small community, Forest Service employees. Word gets around." He poked at the fire again. "You saw something here, didn't you? Something you couldn't explain." I didn't answer, didn't confirm or deny. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he continued. "I'm here because my son asked me to be." "Your son?" He nodded slowly. "My son built the first fire here, and the second one, and probably several you didn't find." He looked up at me, and I saw pain in his eyes. "He died 4 years ago, November 3rd, tonight." The date hit me like a punch, 4 years ago today. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said carefully. "But I don't understand what that has to do with this place." "He loved these woods," the man said. "Spent every free weekend here, hiking, camping. Said it was the only place he felt at peace." He gestured to the stick circle around the fire. This was something he started doing when he was a teenager, some kind of ritual he made up. 12 sticks for 12 months, all pointing toward the center, toward the fire. He said it represented time converging on a single point. I looked at the sticks with new eyes. What happened to him? "Car accident. Drunk driver crossed the center line on Highway 33, not 2 miles from the park entrance." His voice was flat, reciting facts. "Died instantly. He was 28 years old." "Mr. Whitmore," I said. I'm very sorry, but I still don't understand. If your son died 4 years ago, who's been building these fires?" He smiled, and it was the saddest smile I'd ever seen. "You really want to know?" "Yes." "You won't believe me. Try me." He took a breath. "I've been building them. Every anniversary of his death, I come here and build the fire the way he used to. It's my way of keeping his memory alive, of honoring what he loved." He paused. "But the other fires, the ones you found on random nights, I can't explain those. I've never been here on any night except this one." The implication hung in the air between us. I wanted to tell him about what we'd seen, about the figure that had stepped into the fire and vanished. But I couldn't. The investigation was still technically open, and I'd been ordered not to discuss it. "Mr. Whitmore, I need you to understand that what you're doing, while I appreciate the sentiment, is technically illegal. You're building fires outside designated areas, trespassing after hours." "I know," he said. "Are you going to arrest me?" I looked at the fire, at the carefully arranged sticks, at this grieving father who just wanted to feel close to his dead son. "No, but I need you to put out the fire before you leave, and I need you to promise me you won't come back. If you want to honor your son's memory, do it at the designated memorial sites or at home. Not here." He nodded slowly. "I understand." I helped him extinguish the fire and scatter the sticks. As we walked back up the trail together, I asked him a question that had been bothering me. "Your son, what did he look like?" Whitmore pulled out his wallet, showed me a photo. A young man with dark hair and a wide smile, standing in front of a waterfall somewhere in the forest. "About 6 feet tall," Whitmore said. "Athletic build, size 11 boots. He always wore this green hunting jacket, even when it was too warm for it. Size 11 boots, green jacket." "Mr. Whitmore, did your son ever wear a black ski mask?" He looked at me strangely. "Yeah, actually. He had one he used for hunting in the cold months. Said it kept his face warm better than a scarf." He paused. "Why?" "No reason," I lied. "Just trying to get a complete picture." I escorted him back to his truck, verified that he'd put out the fire completely, and watched him drive away. Then I sat in my own truck for a long time, trying to process what I'd just learned. The figure we'd seen had matched the description of Whitmore's son. The boots, the jacket, the build, everything fit. But Whitmore's son was dead, had been dead for 4 years. So either we'd encountered someone impersonating a dead man, or we'd encountered something else entirely. Something I didn't want to think about too closely. I never told Tucker or Melissa about meeting Paul Whitmore. I never told them about his son or the connection to the fires. I told myself it didn't matter, that it was just coincidence. But I stopped patrolling near Hubbard Creek after that. And when other rangers reported seeing unusual lights in that area, or hearing strange sounds, I didn't volunteer to investigate. I could have ended my story with Paul Whitmore driving away into the night. That would have been a neat conclusion, leaving everything ambiguous enough that you could believe whatever explanation made you comfortable. Maybe it was just a grieving father and an elaborate coincidence. Maybe someone was playing an elaborate prank. Maybe there was some rational explanation we just hadn't found yet. But that's not what happened. And if I'm going to tell this story, I need to tell all of it, including the part that made me retire early with that stress-related incident on my record. It was 3 months after my encounter with Paul Whitmore. February, in the dead of winter, when the bankhead turns gray and cold, and most sensible people stay away. We had a light snow that morning, unusual for Alabama, and everything was covered in a thin white layer that made the forest look almost magical. I was on day patrol, covering the western section alone. Tucker had transferred to a station in Tennessee the month before. He never said it was because of what we'd witnessed, but I knew. I'd seen it in his eyes during those final weeks, the way he'd flinch at shadows, the way he'd avoid any assignment that took him near Hubbard Creek. Around 1400 hours, I got a radio call from dispatch. "Hank, we've got a reported lost hiker in your area. Caller said her husband went for a day hike yesterday and didn't come back. Last known position was near the old logging road off Highway 33. My stomach tightened. The old logging road, of course. Copy that. On my way. Be advised. Caller said her husband has been acting strangely lately. Possible mental health concerns. Understood. I drove to the old logging road, noting the fresh tire tracks in the snow. Someone had driven down here recently. I followed the tracks to the usual parking spot and found a silver sedan, empty, covered in a thin layer of snow. I checked the registration. Registered to a Mark Hensley local address. The tracks leading from the car were partially filled with fresh snow but still visible. Someone had walked down toward the creek, following the trail I'd walked so many times before. I radioed my position and started following the tracks. They were erratic, wandering off the path and then back on, like the person making them was confused or disoriented. Several times I saw where they'd stopped, turned in a circle, then continued on. As I got closer to the clearing, I heard something, a voice echoing through the trees. Someone was talking, but I couldn't make out the words. I approached slowly, quietly, using the trees for cover. When I could see the clearing, I stopped and observed. There was a man standing by the creek, his back to me. Middle-aged, wearing a blue winter coat and jeans. He was talking to someone, having an animated conversation, his hands gesturing as he spoke. But there was no one else there. I watched for several minutes as he continued his one-sided conversation. He'd pause, as if listening to responses, then speak again. Sometimes he laughed. Sometimes his voice took on an angry tone. This was bad. The mental health concerns dispatch had mentioned were obviously more serious than they'd implied. The man was in crisis, possibly experiencing delusions or hallucinations, and he was doing it out here in freezing weather, miles from help. I needed to approach carefully, avoid startling him or escalating whatever was happening in his mind. I stepped out of the trees, keeping my hands visible. "Mr. Hensley, I'm Ranger Reddick with the Forest Service. Your wife is worried about you." He stopped talking and turned to look at me. His face was flushed from the cold, his eyes red-rimmed. "You can see me?" "Yes, sir." "I can see you. But can you see them?" He gestured toward the empty space beside him. "Can you see the others?" I moved closer slowly. "Mr. Hensley, there's no one else here. It's just you and me." "No," he insisted. "They're right here. They've been here for days, keeping me company. They understand. I understand that you're going through something difficult right now, but you need to come with me. It's too cold to stay out here. You could get hypothermia." "I can't leave," he said. "Not yet. They haven't shown me everything." "Shown you what?" He smiled, and there was something wrong with that smile. It was too wide, too fixed. How to build the fire, how to arrange the sticks. It's very important that it's done correctly, you see. 12 sticks for 12 months, all pointing toward the center. Every hair on my neck stood up. "Who taught you that?" "They did." He gestured again to the empty space. "The ones who live here. They've been waiting for someone who would listen." I was close enough now to see his pupils. They were normal-sized, reactive. He didn't appear to be on drugs, but his affect was all wrong. His behavior disconnected from reality in a way that set off every alarm bell in my training. "Mr. Hensley, I need you to come with me now. We can talk more when we get back to the station, somewhere warm." "I'll show you," he said suddenly. "I'll show you how to build it properly. Then you'll understand." He turned and walked toward the center of the clearing, to the exact spot where the fires had been built. He knelt down and started gathering sticks from the ground. "Mr. Hensley, I need you to stop. Stand up and walk toward me." He ignored me, focused entirely on arranging the sticks into a careful teepee formation. His movements were precise, practiced, like he'd done this dozens of times. I moved closer, ready to physically intervene if necessary. "Sir, I'm going to need you to stop what you're doing and come with me." "Just a few more pieces," he muttered. "It has to be perfect. They said it has to be perfect." He produced a lighter from his pocket and held it to the base of the stick structure. The wood caught immediately, flames spreading through the dried pine. "There," he said with satisfaction. "Now the sticks, 12 sticks, evenly spaced." I should have grabbed him then, should have pulled him away from the fire and called for backup. But I was transfixed, watching as he placed the sticks in that familiar circle, each one pointing toward the flames. When he finished, he stood up and turned to me. "Do you see them now?" "See who?" "The others, they're coming through." And that's when I saw it. In the space between the fire and the tree line, the air seemed to shimmer, like heat waves rising from summer asphalt, except it was February and freezing cold. The shimmer grew more pronounced, taking on a vague shape. Then another shape beside it. Then another. 3 figures standing at the edge of the clearing. Indistinct, barely visible, but definitely there. Hensley smiled. "You do see them. I knew you would. I knew I wasn't crazy." One of the figures moved forward, becoming slightly more defined. It was wearing a green jacket. It raised one hand in what might have been a wave or a beckoning gesture. "They want us to join them," Hensley said. "They've been so lonely here, waiting for someone to understand. But now we can be with them. We just have to go through the fire." "No," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Mr. Hensley, we need to leave now." "But they're my friends," he protested. "They've been so kind to me. They've shown me things, beautiful things, and all they want is company." He took a step toward the fire. I grabbed his arm hard. "We're leaving, right now." He tried to pull away. "Let go. You don't understand. They're waiting for us." The figures moved closer. I could see more detail now, and what I saw made my blood turn cold. They had faces, or approximations of faces. Features that were almost but not quite right. Mouths that were too wide. Eyes that were too dark. And they were all staring at us with an intensity that felt hungry. "They're not your friends," I said, pulling Hensley backward. "Whatever they are, they're not your friends." "You're wrong," he shouted, fighting against my grip. "They understand me. They care about me. More than my wife ever did, more than anyone ever did." One of the figures stepped closer to the fire. Close enough that I could see it was wearing that black ski mask. Close enough that I recognized the build, the posture, the boots. It looked exactly like the figure we'd confronted 3 months ago. "Walk," I commanded Hensley, physically dragging him now. "Walk, or I'll carry you." He struggled, but I was stronger. I pulled him away from the clearing back toward the trail, never taking my eyes off those figures by the fire. They didn't follow. They just watched as I dragged a screaming, thrashing Hensley up the trail and away from the creek. It took me 20 minutes to get him back to the vehicles. By the time I did, backup had arrived. 2 deputies from the county sheriff's office and an ambulance. They took Hensley, sedated him, transported him to a psychiatric facility for evaluation. I gave my statement to the deputies, leaving out the part about the figures. I said Hensley had been attempting to build a fire and had become agitated when I tried to stop him. They didn't press for details. They'd seen enough mental health crises to know that people in that state didn't always act rationally. After they left, I walked back down to the clearing. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to see it again, to confirm what I'd witnessed. Maybe I needed to extinguish the fire Hensley had built. The clearing was empty. The fire was already out, just cold ash as if it had been extinguished hours ago. The sticks were scattered, no longer in their careful circle. And in the snow around the clearing I saw footprints, lots of them, different sizes, different tread patterns. They circled the clearing like people had been dancing or walking in rings. But all of the prints led inward, toward where the fire had been. None of them led out. I reported everything to Dennison that evening. Every detail, including the figures I'd seen. I expected him to dismiss it, to suggest I'd been seeing things or misinterpreting shadows. Instead, he listened quietly, then opened a desk drawer and pulled out a file. An old file, yellowed with age. 1983, he said. Before either of us worked here, 3 hikers went missing in the Bankhead, all within 2 months of each other. All of them were last seen near Hubbard Creek. One of them was a Forest Service employee, a seasonal ranger named Daniel Mercer. He showed me a photo, a young man in a ranger uniform, smiling at the camera. I felt sick recognition. They found his jacket, Dennison continued. Green hunting jacket about a quarter-mile from where your clearing is, but they never found him. The other 2 were never found at all. Why didn't anyone tell me about this? Because it was 40 years ago, and the official conclusion was that they'd gotten lost and died of exposure. The forest is big, Hank. Bodies don't always turn up. But you don't believe that. He closed the file. I've worked in this forest for 25 years, and in that time I've heard stories. Rangers who see things they can't explain. Hikers who report conversations with people who aren't there. Lights in the woods that move in ways lights shouldn't move. He looked at me directly. I've learned not to ask too many questions. That's not good enough, I said. People are in danger. Hensley almost walked into that fire. If I hadn't been there, I know. And we'll be monitoring that area more closely from now on. But Hank, you need to understand something. Whatever is happening at that clearing, it's been happening for a very long time. And in all that time, no one has figured out how to stop it. So we just let it continue. We do our jobs. We patrol, we watch, we warn people away when we can. But we don't go looking for explanations to questions that don't want to be answered. I didn't agree with him. I thought we had a responsibility to do more. But over the following weeks, as I tried to investigate further, I hit wall after wall. Records were missing or incomplete. Witnesses didn't want to talk. Even Paul Whitmore, when I tried to contact him again, had moved away without leaving a forwarding address. And every night, when I closed my eyes, I saw those figures standing by the fire. Waiting, patient, hungry. I requested a transfer in March. When that was denied, I filed for early retirement on medical grounds. The stress-related incident in my file refers to a panic attack I had while on patrol, though they don't mention what triggered it. They don't mention that I'd been driving past the old logging road, and I'd seen smoke rising from the direction of the clearing, and I'd simply frozen. Couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but sit there in my truck until another ranger found me and called for help. I don't patrol anymore. Don't spend time in the woods if I can help it. Some people might say I'm a coward for walking away, but I sleep better now than I did in those final months. Tucker called me last week. First time I'd heard from him since he transferred. He's doing well, he said. Has a girlfriend, thinking about buying a house. But then at the end of the call, he asked me if I'd heard anything about Hubbard Creek. I told him no. Told him I didn't follow news about the Bankhead anymore. There was a long pause. Then he said, "They found another one. Hiker who wandered off in January. Search and rescue found his body 3 days ago, about 100 yards from that clearing. Medical examiner said cause of death was hypothermia, but..." Another pause. "They found pine sticks in his pockets, Hank. 12 of them, all cut to the same length." I didn't know what to say to that. "Just thought you should know," Tucker said quietly, "in case you ever thought about going back." I won't go back. Whatever is at that clearing, whatever is building those fires and arranging those sticks and waiting in the shadows for people who are vulnerable enough to see them, it can stay there. It belongs to the forest now, or maybe it always did. I've told you this story because I needed someone to hear it who wouldn't immediately try to explain it away or diagnose me with a mental illness. What I saw was real. What Tucker and Melissa and I witnessed that night was real. And what's still happening out there right now, at a small clearing by Hubbard Creek in the Bankhead National Forest, is real. If you ever find yourself hiking in northwest Alabama, and you smell wood smoke when you shouldn't, or you see a fire burning where no one should be camping, I'm asking you to do something for me. Don't investigate. Don't try to get closer. Just turn around and walk away. Because some fires burn for reasons we're not meant to understand. And some doors, once opened, lead to places you can never return from. I learned that lesson the hard way. I hope you never have to learn it at all. My name is Leslie McGraw, and I spent 8 years working as a wildlife officer in the Talladega National Forest in east central Alabama. When people hear wildlife officer, they usually picture someone dealing with poachers or rescuing injured animals. And sure, that was part of the job. But the reality is that most of my time was spent doing far less dramatic things. Trail maintenance, permit checks, search coordination when hikers got themselves turned around in the backcountry. It's that last part that eventually led me to find what I still think of as the collecting trail, though that's not its official name. On the maps, it's marked as the Nulhagen Spur, a 3-mile connector trail that runs between 2 more popular routes in the Chocolaco Wildlife Management Area. Most hikers skip it entirely. It doesn't lead anywhere particularly scenic, doesn't have any waterfalls or overlooks or campsites that would make the hike worthwhile. It's just 3 miles of dense forest, steep grades, and rocky terrain that'll tear up your boots if you're not careful. I came across your channel about 6 months ago, during one of those sleepless nights where your brain won't shut off no matter how tired your body is. I've listened to enough of your park ranger stories to know that you understand something most people don't. Sometimes, the scariest thing in the woods isn't a bear or a storm or getting lost. Sometimes, it's the evidence that someone else was lost before you, and they never found their way back out. Before I tell you what happened on the Nulhagen Spur, you need to understand my partner, Savannah Howe. She was 29 when we got partnered up, fresh from a stint with Georgia State Parks, methodical in a way that sometimes drove me crazy, but also made her incredibly good at her job. Where I'd see a broken branch and think probably a deer, Savannah would photograph it, measure it, check the angle and the height and cross-reference it with weather data to determine exactly when and how it broke. She kept notebooks, plural, color-coded tabs, and everything. I used to tease her about it. "You're not going to solve any great mysteries out here," I'd tell her. "Most of what we deal with is drunk campers and people who think they can hike 10 miles in flip-flops." She'd just smile and keep writing in her notebooks. It was early April when we first started finding the objects. Spring in Alabama means everything's blooming and beautiful, but it also means the trails get muddy and overgrown from all the rain. Savannah and I were assigned to do a routine check of the Nulhagen Spur, which we tried to inspect at least once a month during hiking season. The trail doesn't get much use, but we still needed to make sure it was passable and safe. We started at the southern trailhead around 9 in the morning. It was one of those perfect spring days. Temperature in the low 70s, sun filtering through the new leaves on the oak and hickory trees. The trail starts out fairly level for the first half mile, following an old logging road before it branches off into proper wilderness. About 40 minutes in, Savannah stopped walking. I was a few steps ahead of her, so I turned back. "What's up?" She was crouched down, examining something on the trail. When I got closer, I saw it was a button. Just a regular shirt button, white, 4 holes, lying right in the center of the path. "Probably fell off someone's shirt," I said. Savannah picked it up carefully, turned it over in her gloved hand. "It's clean." So, if it's been lying on a muddy trail, it shouldn't be clean." She held it up to the light. "No dirt in the holes, no staining on the thread marks. This hasn't been here long." I shrugged. "Maybe it fell off this morning. Someone could have hiked through earlier." She pulled out one of her notebooks and a small evidence bag. She dropped the button in, labeled it, and wrote down the GPS coordinates and time. "You're really cataloging a lost button?" I asked. "Everything tells a story," she said, which was very Savannah. "Even a button." We continued hiking. The trail started climbing after that first mile, switchbacking up a ridgeline that gave us occasional glimpses of the valley below. The forest here was older, the pines tall and straight, their needles carpeting the ground in a thick orange mat that muffled our footsteps. Savannah stopped again about 20 minutes later. This time, she didn't say anything, just pointed. There was a hair clip on the trail. One of those simple black ones, the kind you can buy in a pack of 20 at any drugstore. It was sitting right in the middle of the path, as clean and unstained as the button had been. "Okay, that's weird," I admitted. She bagged it, labeled it, recorded the coordinates. Then she pulled out her measuring tape and walked back toward where we'd found the button. I watched as she counted her steps, measuring the distance. 112 feet, she said. About 34 meters. Roughly 50 paces. Is that significant? I don't know yet. We kept walking. The trail leveled out for a stretch, running along the ridge through a grove of longleaf pine. This was my favorite part of the Nulhegan Spur, where the canopy opened up enough to let in more light, and you could hear birds calling back and forth across the valley. The next object was a lighter, or part of one, anyway. The plastic casing was cracked, and the metal wheel was missing, but you could still see part of the brand name on the side. It was sitting on a flat rock right beside the trail, positioned so carefully that it almost looked like someone had placed it there deliberately. Savannah didn't even need to say anything this time. She just gave me a look that said, "I told you so," and started measuring the distance from the hair clip. 114 feet, she announced. Approximately the same distance as between the first 2 items. Could be coincidence, I said, but I didn't really believe it anymore. Could be, Savannah agreed. Let's keep going. Over the next mile, we found 6 more objects, a pocket knife handle with no blade, a shoelace tied in a careful knot, a car key that looked like it had been filed down, a small plastic compass with a cracked face, a piece of a leather belt, just a 3-inch section with part of the buckle still attached, and finally a single earring, silver, with a small blue stone. Every single object was roughly the same distance from the previous one, between 110 and 120 feet, with the spacing so consistent that it couldn't possibly be accidental. And every object was clean, free of the dirt and debris you'd expect from something that had been lying on a forest trail. We stopped for lunch at the 2-mile mark, sitting on a fallen log beside the trail. Savannah had laid out all 9 evidence bags on the log beside us, arranging them in the order we'd found them. "This is deliberate," she said, not looking at me. "Someone placed these here. Why would someone do that?" I don't know. Trail markers, maybe? But that doesn't make sense. The Mohegan Spur is clearly marked with blazes. You'd have to be trying to get lost to miss them. I studied the objects: button, hair clip, lighter, knife handle, shoelace, key, compass, belt piece, earring. They weren't similar items. They weren't even made of the same materials. The only thing they had in common was that they were all small, personal items. Things you'd carry in your pockets or wear on your person. Maybe someone's playing a game, I suggested. Like geocaching, but weirder. Maybe. Savannah didn't sound convinced. But why these specific items, and why space them so precisely? We finished the last mile of trail in relative silence. I kept expecting to find another object, kept scanning the ground ahead of us for any sign of something that didn't belong. But the trail remained clear all the way to the northern trailhead where we'd left Savannah's truck that morning. Back at the ranger station, Savannah spread out a map of the Mohegan Spur and marked the location of each object we'd found. When she connected the dots, they formed a nearly straight line along the trail, with those eerily consistent spaces between them. "I'm going to file a report," she said. "This needs to be documented." A report about found objects? Our supervisor's going to think we've lost our minds. I don't care. Something about this isn't right, Leslie. You feel it too, don't you? I did feel it. Had felt it since we'd found that third object. But I couldn't articulate exactly what was wrong. Maybe it was the precision of the placement. Maybe it was the cleanliness of the items. Or maybe it was just the fact that in 8 years of working in this forest, I'd never seen anything quite like this. That night, I found myself thinking about the objects. Trying to imagine the kind of person who would hike 3 miles into the backcountry to carefully place random items at measured intervals. It didn't make sense. There was no audience for this strange installation. No one to appreciate the precision of it. The Mohegan Spur saw maybe a dozen hikers in a good month. Unless the audience wasn't other hikers. Unless whoever placed those objects did it for their own reasons. Reasons that had nothing to do with being seen or appreciated. That thought bothered me more than I wanted to admit. 3 days later, Savannah and I were assigned to respond to a missing hiker report. A woman named Jennifer Kowalski had failed to return from a day hike in the Chocolaco area. Her husband had called it in that morning after she didn't come home the previous evening. She'd told him she was planning to hike the Mohegan Spur, which she'd done once before and enjoyed despite its lack of scenic payoff. We organized a search party. 6 rangers, 3 volunteers, and 2 cadaver dogs. We split into teams and covered both ends of the trail simultaneously, moving toward the middle. Savannah and I took the southern approach, the same direction we'd hiked 3 days earlier. "Look for the objects," Savannah said quietly as we started up the trail. "If they're gone, or if there are more of them, I want to know." The button was still there, in roughly the same spot we'd found it. So was the hair clip, the lighter, the knife handle, the shoelace. All of them were exactly where we'd left them, untouched and still eerily clean despite 3 days of weather. But when we got to where the compass should have been, it was gone. In its place was something new. A bracelet, leather with a small silver charm. It was positioned in the exact center of the trail, just like all the others had been. Savannah photographed it from multiple angles before bagging it. Her hands were shaking slightly, which scared me because Savannah never got shaken. "This isn't random," she said. "Someone's maintaining this. Someone's checking these items and replacing them. Or adding to them," I pointed out. We found 9 objects. Now there are 8 old ones and 1 new one. We continued hiking, calling Jennifer's name every few minutes and listening for any response. The forest was quiet except for our voices and the sound of our boots on the trail. No birds singing, no squirrels rustling in the undergrowth. just an oppressive silence that seemed to press in from all sides. When we reached the spot where we'd found the earring, it was also gone. In its place was a watch, a women's watch with a leather band, stopped at 3:47. Savannah's face had gone pale. "That's a personal item. That's someone's watch. Maybe it's the hiker's," I said, though the thought made my stomach clench. Maybe she dropped it. Then where is she? We searched the area thoroughly, expanding out from the trail in concentric circles. No sign of Jennifer. No footprints leading off the path. No torn clothing caught on branches. No evidence that anyone had left the trail at all. The other search teams hadn't found anything either. By nightfall, we'd covered the entire trail and the surrounding forest without finding a single trace of Jennifer Kowalski except for that watch, assuming it was even hers. We called off the search at dusk with plans to resume at first light. But that night, lying in my bed at home, I couldn't stop thinking about those objects. 9 items, spaced at perfect intervals. Then one replaced with a bracelet, and another with a watch. Savannah called me at 6 in the morning. I've been going through missing persons reports for the area. It's 6 a.m., Savannah. In the last 3 years, 4 hikers have gone missing in or near Chocolaco. All of them were last seen planning to hike the Nulhagen Spur. None of them were ever found. I sat up in bed. 4 people? Justin Vance, March 2 years ago. Kimberly Hart, August 2 years ago. David Sullivan, November last year. And now, Jennifer Kowalski. That's not unusual, I said, trying to convince myself as much as her. People get lost. The terrain is difficult. Lots of places you could fall and not be found. Leslie, I measured the intervals between the objects again. Do you know how many paces are between each one? You said around 50. 48 paces exactly, if you're walking at a normal hiking speed. Do you know what else is 48 paces? I didn't answer. The average distance a person can see clearly on a forest trail, Savannah said. It's line of sight. Someone could be standing at one object, and they'd be able to see clearly to the next object, but not beyond it. What are you saying? I'm saying those objects are markers, waypoints. Someone's using them to track movement along that trail. She paused, and I think every time someone goes missing, a new object gets added. We resumed the search for Jennifer Kowalski at dawn, but Savannah and I had a secondary mission. Before the other searchers arrived, we hiked the entire length of the Nulhagen Spur, documenting every object we found. There were now 11 items total, the original 7 that remained, plus the bracelet, the watch, and 2 new additions we hadn't seen the day before, a laminated park map, folded precisely in quarters, and a small flashlight with dead batteries. Savannah photographed and measured everything. The spacing remained consistent, 48 paces between each object, as measured by a standard hiking stride. And every item was positioned in the exact center of the trail, clearly visible to anyone passing by. These aren't being dropped accidentally, I said, stating the obvious. Someone's placing them here deliberately, someone who knows exactly what they're doing. The question is why, Savannah replied, crouched beside the folded map. What purpose does this serve? I didn't have an answer. Neither did she. We spent 4 more days searching for Jennifer. We brought in additional resources, expanded the search radius, used drones to survey the canopy in case she'd fallen and gotten caught in the trees. We found nothing. No body, no evidence of injury, no sign that she'd ever been on that trail except for the watch, which her husband confirmed was hers. On the 5th day, the official search was called off. Jennifer Kowalski was declared a missing person, and her case was turned over to the county sheriff's department for further investigation. But in practical terms, everyone knew what that meant. Without any leads, without any evidence, The case would go cold. She'd become another name on a list of people who walked into the forest and never came back. Savannah refused to let it go. She started spending her off-duty hours researching the previous missing persons cases, pulling reports and conducting interviews with family members. I helped when I could, but mostly I worried about her. She wasn't sleeping enough, wasn't eating properly. She'd become obsessed in a way that felt unhealthy. "You need to take a break," I told her one evening when I found her at the ranger station at 9 p.m., surrounded by papers and photographs. "I'm close to something," she insisted. "I can feel it." She showed me what she'd discovered. All 4 of the previous missing hikers had certain things in common. They were all solo hikers, all experienced with the forest. All of them had told someone their plans before leaving, which meant they weren't trying to disappear intentionally. And all of them vanished during daylight hours on clear days. No weather events or other circumstances that might explain an accident. "What about the objects?" I asked. "Did you find any connection to the missing people?" She handed me a file. Inside were photographs of personal items belonging to the missing hikers, provided by their families. I felt my blood go cold as I looked through them. Justin Vance had owned a pocket knife identical to the handle we'd found on the trail. Kimberly Hart had worn silver earrings with blue stones. David Sullivan's belt had a distinctive buckle, the same type as the partial belt we'd found. "These are their belongings," I whispered. "These objects on the trail, they belong to the missing hikers." "That's what I think," Savannah said. "Someone took items from them and placed them on the trail as markers, but I still don't know why or who. We need to report this to the sheriff." "And tell them what? That we found some personal items on a trail. They'll say the hikers dropped them before they got lost. They won't see the pattern, Leslie. They won't believe that someone's deliberately collecting these things and arranging them." She was probably right. Without more concrete evidence, without some proof of foul play, the sheriff's department would dismiss our theory as speculation at best, paranoia at worst. "So, what do we do?" I asked. Savannah looked at me with an intensity that was almost frightening. "We watch the trail. We document everything, and we wait for whoever's doing this to make a mistake." Over the next 2 weeks, Savannah and I established a routine. We'd hike the Nulhegan Spur every 3rd day, photographing and measuring the objects, checking for any changes or additions. We did it on our own time, before or after our regular shifts, never mentioning it to our supervisor or the other rangers. The objects remained consistent. 11 items, perfectly spaced, each one clean and carefully positioned. No new additions, no items removed. It was as if the trail had reached some kind of equilibrium, satisfied with its current collection. But Savannah wasn't satisfied. She started setting up trail cameras at strategic points along the Nulhegan Spur, hoping to capture footage of whoever was maintaining the objects. She positioned them carefully, disguised among the vegetation angled to cover the trail without being obvious to passing hikers. "If someone's checking these items regularly," she reasoned, "the cameras will catch them." 2 weeks went by. The cameras captured footage of exactly 3 hikers using the Nulhegan Spur, all of them clearly visible. All of them passing through without stopping or paying any attention to the objects on the trail. 2 deer, 1 fox, and a black bear that knocked over one of the cameras while investigating it. No mysterious figures maintaining the trail. No evidence of anyone placing or removing objects. "They must know the cameras are there," Savannah said, frustrated. "They're avoiding them." "Or there's no one to catch," I suggested gently. "Maybe we're seeing patterns that don't exist. Maybe these are just random objects and we're connecting dots that shouldn't be connected." She gave me a look that could have cut glass. "You don't believe that any more than I do." She was right. I didn't believe it, because 2 nights earlier I'd dreamed about the trail. In my dream, I was walking the Nulhegan Spur in darkness, following a line of glowing objects that stretched ahead of me into the forest. I kept walking, following the markers, and with each one I passed, I could feel something behind me getting closer. Something patient and deliberate that moved with the same careful precision as whoever had placed those objects. I woke up in a cold sweat, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the dream was trying to tell me something important. It was early May when things changed. Savannah and I were doing our regular check of the trail, starting from the southern trailhead just after dawn. The morning was cool, fog clinging to the low spots in the forest, turning the trees into gray phantoms. We found the button where it always was, then the hair clip, the broken lighter, everything in its proper place. But when we reached where the knife handle should have been, it was gone. In its place was a ranger badge, my badge. I stared at it for a long moment, unable to process what I was seeing. My badge, the one I clipped to my belt every morning, was sitting in the center of the trail on the Nulhegan Spur. But my badge was on my belt. I could feel it there, the familiar weight against my hip. I reached down and unclipped it, held it up next to the one on the trail. They were identical. Same number, same name engraved on the back, same small scratch on the corner where I'd dropped it on a rock 2 years ago. "How is this possible?" I asked, my voice coming out as barely more than a whisper. Savannah's face had gone white. She reached for her camera, photographed the badge from multiple angles, then carefully picked it up with her gloved hand. "It's real," she said, examining it closely. "This is a genuine Forest Service badge. Same make, same serial number as yours. But I have mine. I'm wearing mine right now." "I know." We stood there in silence, the fog swirling around our feet, both of us trying to make sense of what we were seeing. "Savannah," I said slowly, "what if this isn't about the missing hikers?" "What do you mean?" "What if the objects aren't markers of who's already gone? What if they're markers for who's next?" She looked at me, and I saw my own fear reflected in her eyes. "We need to leave," she said, "right now." We turned to head back down the trail, but Savannah grabbed my arm. "Wait. Listen." I listened. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no insects, no wind moving through the trees. Just an oppressive, suffocating quiet that felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, measured footsteps somewhere ahead of us on the trail, moving in our direction. "Someone's coming," Savannah whispered. We stepped off the trail, moving into the undergrowth and crouching behind a fallen pine. Through the fog, I could see a shape approaching. Walking at that same measured pace, each step deliberate and precise. As the figure got closer, I could make out more details. It was a person, average height and build, wearing hiking clothes and a backpack. They were walking with their head down, watching the trail. They stopped when they reached the spot where my badge had been. For a long moment, they just stood there, motionless, staring at the empty space on the trail. Then they reached into their pocket and pulled something out. From our hiding spot, I couldn't see what it was. They bent down and placed it carefully on the trail, positioning it with the same meticulous care I'd seen in all the other objects. They stood up, looked around slowly as if sensing they were being watched, then continued walking up the trail. Within seconds, the fog had swallowed them completely, and they were gone. We waited a full 5 minutes before moving. When we finally stepped back onto the trail, we found what the figure had left. It was a photograph, a printed photograph, slightly bent at the corners. The image showed 2 women in ranger uniforms standing at a trailhead sign. One of them was blonde, the other had dark hair. It was Savannah and me. The photo had been taken at the southern trailhead of the Nulhegan Spur. the very spot where we'd started our hike that morning. "This was taken today," Savannah said, her voice shaking. "Less than an hour ago. They were there. They were watching us." I looked back down the trail, toward where the figure had disappeared. "We need to follow them." "Are you insane? They just left our photograph on a trail lined with objects taken from missing persons." "Exactly, which means we might be the only people who can stop this from happening to someone else." Savannah looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, but we call for backup first, and we stay together no matter what." I radioed the ranger station, explained that we were following a person of interest on the Nohagan Spur and needed immediate assistance. The dispatcher acknowledged and said they'd send units to both trailheads. We started up the trail, moving quickly but quietly. The fog was beginning to lift, burned away by the rising sun, which made visibility better but also meant we were more exposed. We found the next object after about 100 yards. A water bottle, placed in the center of the trail. Standard hiking water bottle. Nothing remarkable about it except that it definitely hadn't been there on our way up. "They're still marking the trail," Savannah said. "Still adding to it." We kept walking. Every 120 feet or so we found a new object. A granola bar wrapper, a hair tie, a compass, a folded bandana. Each one positioned with that same careful precision. They're leading us somewhere, I realized. These new objects, they're not random. They want us to follow. "Then we don't follow," Savannah said firmly. "We get off the trail, circle around, approach from a different angle." It was a good plan, tactically sound, but something stopped me, because I'd realized something else about the spacing of the objects. 48 paces between each one. Line of sight distance, which meant if we stayed on the trail, if we followed the markers, we'd be able to see ahead to the next object, but not beyond it. But if whoever was placing these objects was also 48 paces ahead of us, moving at the same speed we were moving, we'd never catch up. We'd just keep following, marker after marker, deeper into the forest. "It's a trap," I said. "They're luring us in, keeping us at exactly the right distance. If we try to catch up, they'll know. They'll adjust their pace. So what do we do?" I thought about it. We don't try to catch them. We let them lead us to wherever they're going, and we see what they want us to see. It was a terrible plan. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around, to wait for backup, to not walk voluntarily into whatever this person had planned. But I also knew that if we didn't follow now, we might never get another chance. They'd disappear back into the forest, and we'd be left with nothing but photographs and theories. We continued up the trail, following the line of objects. The Nohagan Spur climbed steadily here, switchbacking up a steep ridge. My legs were burning from the pace we were maintaining, and my breath came in short gasps. After about 20 minutes, the trail leveled out and the forest opened up into a small clearing. And that's where the objects stopped. In the center of the clearing, arranged in a perfect circle, were dozens of items. Hundreds, maybe. Buttons and coins and keys and watches and jewelry and clothing. All of it laid out with the same meticulous care we'd seen on the trail, creating a pattern that spiraled inward toward the center. And in the very center of the spiral, there was a backpack, a woman's hiking backpack, dusty and weathered. "That's Jennifer's," Savannah whispered. "That's Jennifer Kowalski's backpack." We approached slowly, both of us scanning the tree line for any sign of the person we'd been following. The clearing was empty, silent except for our footsteps and the hammering of my heart. Savannah knelt beside the backpack and carefully opened it. Inside were the usual hiking supplies: water bottles, energy bars, a first aid kit, a map, and at the bottom, wrapped in a plastic bag, was a notebook. She pulled it out, opened it. The first page had a single sentence written in neat, precise handwriting. Every path has a pattern. Every pattern has a purpose. The rest of the pages were filled with lists, dates and names and descriptions of objects. It was a catalog, I realized, a detailed record of every item in the clearing, when it was collected, and who it had belonged to. I saw Jennifer Kowalski's name. March 15th. Watch, leather band. I saw Kimberly Hart's name. August 3rd. Earring, silver with blue stone. I saw David Sullivan's name. November 22nd. Belt section with buckle. And at the very bottom of the most recent page, in that same precise handwriting, Leslie McGraw, May 8th, badge. Savannah Howe, May 8th, photograph. We weren't just following someone. We were their next collection. We needed to get out of that clearing. Every instinct I had was screaming that we were in immediate danger, that we'd walked directly into whatever trap had been set for us. But Savannah was still reading the notebook, flipping through pages with increasing agitation. Leslie, you need to see this. We need to leave, now. No, look. She held the notebook out to me, pointing to an entry from 3 years ago. This isn't just a catalog, it's a journal. They've been documenting everything. Despite my fear, I looked. The entries were detailed, almost clinical in their precision. Each one described a person, their hiking patterns, their routines. How many times they'd hiked the Nulhegan Spur, what time of day they preferred, whether they hiked alone or with others. They're studying people, I said, choosing their targets carefully. It's more than that. Savannah flipped to another page, dated from 2 months ago. The entry described us, our patrol schedule, the frequency of our trail checks, even the fact that we'd been cataloging the objects we'd found. They know we've been investigating, she said. They've known the whole time, and they've been planning for this. I heard a sound behind us, a soft scraping like a boot on rock. We both spun around, but the clearing remained empty. The tree line was maybe 30 yards away in all directions, dense enough that someone could easily be hidden there watching us. We need to call this in, I said, reaching for my radio. But when I pressed the button, all I got was static. I tried again, adjusted the frequency, tried the emergency channel. Nothing but white noise. Mine's not working either, Savannah said, lowering her own radio. They're jamming us somehow. That's not possible. Not without equipment, not out here. But even as I said it, I knew I was wrong, because everything about this situation had been carefully planned and precisely executed. Whoever was doing this had the resources and knowledge to stay hidden, to track people, to collect items without being noticed. Jamming a radio frequency wasn't beyond their capabilities. The backup units, I said. They should be at the trailheads by now. When we don't check in, they'll come looking for us. Will they? Savannah looked at me. We told dispatch we were following a person of interest. We didn't tell them where. The Nulhegan Spur is 3 miles long with multiple side trails and offshoots. They could search for hours and not find us. She was right. We'd been careless, overconfident. We'd followed our suspect directly into a trap, and now we were exactly where they wanted us to be. So we walk out, I said. Back down the trail, straight to the southern trailhead. We move fast, and we don't stop. Savannah nodded, shoving the notebook into her pack. We'd need it as evidence, assuming we made it out to present it. We started back toward the trail entrance to the clearing, but something made me stop. The objects in the spiral pattern, the hundreds of items arranged so carefully. I'd been so focused on the notebook that I hadn't really looked at them closely. Savannah, I said slowly, do you see any ranger badges in that collection? She scanned the spiral, then shook her head. No. Why? Because mine was on the trail, but it's not here in the clearing with all the others. Neither is our photograph. Maybe they haven't added them yet. Or maybe they're still on the trail because we're not part of the collection yet. I looked at her. We're not meant to end up here. This clearing, this collection, it's not for us. It's for everyone who came before. Then where are we meant to end up? I didn't have an answer for that, and I wasn't sure I wanted to find one. We moved quickly back to where the trail exited the clearing, but when we got there, we found something that made my blood run cold. The trail was blocked. Someone had dragged fallen branches and small logs across the path, creating a deliberate barrier. It wasn't impassable, but it was obvious. A clear message that we weren't meant to leave this way. The other side, Savannah said, pointing to where the trail continued northward out of the clearing. We can take that route, circle around to the northern trailhead. But when we reached the north exit, we found the same thing. Branches deliberately piled to block the path. We were trapped in the clearing. Okay, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We go through the woods. We don't need the trail. We know which direction the trailheads are. We just pick a direction and walk. Bad idea, Savannah said. This part of the forest is dense and the terrain is steep and rocky. It's easy to get turned around, especially if someone's deliberately trying to confuse us. What choice do we have? She was about to answer when we both heard it. Footsteps. Multiple sets of footsteps, approaching from different directions around the clearing. We turned back to back instinctively, watching the tree line. The footsteps were getting closer, moving through the undergrowth with that same measured, deliberate pace we'd been following all morning. How many? Savannah whispered. At least 3, maybe more. The footsteps stopped. Whoever was out there had reached the edge of the clearing and was now waiting, hidden in the trees, watching us. Show yourself, I called out, trying to project authority I didn't feel. Forest Service law enforcement. Come out where we can see you. No response. Just silence and the oppressive weight of being watched by unseen eyes. This is your last warning, I tried again. Come out now, or you'll be charged with obstruction and harassment of federal officers. A voice spoke from the trees, so close that I jumped. You found my collection. It was a man's voice, calm and almost conversational. I couldn't pinpoint exactly where it was coming from. The acoustics of the clearing made it seem to come from everywhere at once. We found evidence of multiple felonies, Savannah said, her hand moving to her sidearm. We're taking you in for questioning regarding the disappearances of 4 hikers. Are you? The voice had moved, or maybe it was a different person speaking from a different position. I don't think you understand the situation you're in. Then explain it to us, I said. A pause, then, patterns. Everything in nature follows patterns. Animals follow the same trails. Water flows in predictable paths. Even people, especially people, are creatures of habit and pattern. That doesn't explain what you've done. Doesn't it? Another voice, this one from a different direction. Female, also calm. You've been studying my collection, Officer McGraw. You've seen the spacing, the precision. 48 paces between each marker. Line of sight distance. Do you know why that matters? I didn't answer. Because that's the distance at which a person feels safe, the female voice continued. Close enough to see what's ahead, far enough that you don't feel threatened. That's the distance people naturally maintain when they're following something, when they're curious, when they're investigating. You use the objects to lure people, Savannah said. You knew hikers would be curious, would follow the trail of items. Some did, the male voice agreed. But most didn't even notice. Most people walk through the forest blind, focused on their own thoughts, their own goals. They step right over the markers without ever seeing them. But some people notice, the female voice said. The observant ones, the curious ones, the ones who see patterns where others see chaos. Those are the ones who interest us. The ones who end up missing, I said. The ones who become part of something larger, the male voice corrected. The collection isn't random, Officer McGraw. Every item has meaning. Every person who contributes to it becomes part of the pattern. I realized with growing horror what they were saying. The missing hikers hadn't been killed and their belongings taken. They'd been incorporated somehow, made part of this bizarre collection ritual. Jennifer Kowalski, Savannah said. Where is she? Where she needs to be. The female voice responded. Where the pattern required her to be. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're going to get. The footsteps started again, moving around the clearing in a slow circle. I tried to count them, tried to figure out how many people we were dealing with, but the sounds overlapped and echoed in ways that made it impossible to tell. You've been adding to my collection, the male voice said, and I realized he was talking about the notebook in Savannah's pack. You've been documenting the markers, measuring the spaces, trying to understand the pattern. That's good. That shows potential. Potential for what? I asked. To see beyond the surface. To understand that there are deeper structures underlying everything we think we know about reality. The forest teaches patience. It teaches observation. It teaches that everything eventually returns to the pattern it's meant to follow. He was insane. They were both insane, maybe more than two of them if the footsteps were any indication. And we were trapped in a clearing with them, surrounded, with no way to call for help and no clear route of escape. We're leaving, I said flatly. You can get out of our way, or we'll go through you. You're welcome to try, the female voice said. But I should warn you, the forest is larger than you think. The trails don't always lead where maps say they lead. And the pattern has a way of correcting itself when people try to break free from it. That sounds like a threat. It's an observation. Everything I say is an observation. The footsteps stopped again. In the sudden silence, I heard something else. A faint, metallic sound, like a coin dropping on rock. Then another, then several more. What are they doing? Savannah whispered. I looked down and saw them. Small objects were being thrown into the clearing from multiple directions. Buttons, pins, coins, keys. They bounced and rolled across the ground, adding to the collection in the center of the clearing. They're marking us, I realized, adding us to their pattern. A badge landed at my feet. My badge, or another copy of it. Then a photograph fluttered down, landing face up on a rock. It showed Savannah and me standing in this clearing taken from the tree line, taken minutes ago. You see, the male voice said, you're already part of the collection. The pattern has already incorporated you. All that remains is for you to accept your place in it. Like hell, Savannah said. She drew her sidearm, pointing it toward where she thought the male voice had come from. Show yourself. Now. Silence. Then footsteps, lots of them, all starting to move at once. They were circling the clearing, getting closer, tightening the ring around us. Savannah, I said quietly, we need to pick a direction and run, right now. She nodded. We chose the southern route, the way we'd originally entered. We'd clear the barrier of branches and sprint down the trail as fast as we could. If there were people blocking our path, we'd deal with that when we got there. We moved together toward the blocked trail entrance. The footsteps in the trees adjusted, tracking our movement but not closing in. Not yet. I reached the barrier first and started pulling branches aside. They were heavier than they looked, deliberately wedged together to create a solid obstacle. Behind me, Savannah kept her weapon drawn, watching the tree line. "Hurry," she urged. I yanked a large branch free and tossed it aside, 2 more, then 3. The path was almost clear enough to squeeze through. That's when the first figure stepped out of the trees. The person who emerged from the forest wasn't what I'd expected. I'd been picturing some kind of mountain man type, wild-eyed and disheveled. Instead, he looked utterly ordinary. Mid-40s, clean-shaven, wearing standard hiking gear that wouldn't have looked out of place on any trail in the country. He could have been anyone. He smiled at us. "Going somewhere?" Savannah's gun was trained on him immediately. "Don't move. Put your hands where I can see them." He complied, raising his hand slowly. "Of course, I understand you're frightened. This must all seem very strange to you. Where are the others?" I demanded, still pulling branches away from the trail. "How many of you are there?" "Enough," he said. "The pattern requires multiple perspectives, multiple participants. One person can't maintain it alone." 2 more figures stepped out of the trees, flanking him. A woman on his left, another man on his right. All of them dressed normally, all of them looking like regular hikers. If I'd passed any of them on a trail, I wouldn't have given them a second glance. "Step aside," Savannah ordered. "We're leaving, and you're not going to stop us." "I wouldn't dream of stopping you," the first man said. "But I will ask you a question. When you leave here, what do you think is going to happen?" "You're going to be arrested," I said. "Am I?" He tilted his head. "And what evidence do you have? A collection of found objects in a clearing? That's not illegal. The notebook, it's just observation notes. You can't prove anything and it relates to the missing persons." "We'll prove it," Savannah said, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "Even if you could, it wouldn't matter," the woman said. "The pattern exists independent of us. We're just observers, maintainers. If you remove us, others will come. The collection will continue. The trail will still be marked." "You're insane," I said. "Are we?" The second man spoke for the first time. "You've been hiking the Nullhegan Spur for months now, haven't you, Officer McGraw? You and Officer Howe. Regular patrols, checking the trail. And in all that time, did you ever wonder why this particular trail bothers you so much? Why you keep coming back to it?" I had wondered. I'd wondered every time I was assigned to patrol this area and felt that small knot of dread in my stomach. "It's because you can sense it," he continued. "The pattern, the structure underneath the surface. Most people can't. They walk through life blind to the deeper patterns that govern everything. But people like you, people like us, we see them, we feel them." "This is manipulation," Savannah said. "You're trying to make us doubt ourselves." "I'm trying to make you understand," the first man said. "You asked where the missing hikers are. They're here. They're part of the collection, part of the pattern. Not in the way you think, not physically, but their essence, their contribution to the structure, it remains." He was dancing around a direct confession, staying just vague enough that anything he said could be dismissed as the ramblings of someone mentally ill. It was calculated, intentional. Even if we recorded this conversation, even if we brought all of them in for questioning, they'd have plausible deniability. I'd finished clearing the barrier. The trail was open behind us now. We could run. "Last chance," Savannah said to the 3 figures. "Get on the ground, hands behind your head." They didn't move, didn't even acknowledge the command. They just stood there, watching us with that same calm expression. "Savannah, let's go," I said. We backed away slowly, Savannah keeping her weapon trained on them, me watching the rest of the tree line for any sign of movement. When we reached the trail entrance, we turned and ran. The trail was steep and treacherous, and running down it was asking for a broken ankle or worse. But fear gave us speed and agility we normally wouldn't have had. We crashed through undergrowth, leaped over fallen logs, barely slowed at the switchbacks. Behind us, I could hear them following. Not running, just walking at that same measured pace. They didn't need to run. They knew the trail, knew the forest, and maybe they knew we wouldn't make it out. We'd been running for maybe 10 minutes when Savannah suddenly stopped. "Wait, this isn't right." "What do you mean?" She looked around, recognition and confusion warring on her face. "This section of trail, I recognize this rock formation. We passed it already." "That's impossible. We've been running downhill the whole time. Look." She pointed to a tree beside the trail. Someone had carved a small mark into the bark, just a horizontal line about chest height. I marked that tree this morning when we were hiking up, to help me remember the route. I stared at the mark, then at the surrounding terrain. She was right. We were back where we'd started, at the upper section of the trail near the clearing. Somehow, despite running downhill for 10 solid minutes, we'd ended up right back where we'd begun. "It's not possible," I said. "Trails don't work that way. Geography doesn't work that way." "The pattern has a way of correcting itself," Savannah said quietly, repeating what the woman had told us earlier. "When people try to break free from it." No, that's just psychological manipulation. They've got us turned around somehow, confused us. We just need to think clearly and find the right direction." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it, because the terrain was exactly as I remembered it from our hike up. The rock formation, the specific trees, even a fallen log that I distinctly recalled stepping over. "Maybe we should try the northern route," Savannah suggested. "Go the opposite direction." We turned around and started hiking north toward the other trailhead. This time, we walked instead of running, paying careful attention to our surroundings, noting landmarks to make sure we weren't somehow doubling back on ourselves. We walked for 30 minutes. The trail climbed and descended, passed through groves of pine and oak, crossed a small creek. All of it matched what I remembered of the northern section of the Nulhegan Spur. And then we were back at the clearing. We'd approached from a different direction, but there was no mistaking it. The spiral of objects in the center, the blocked trail entrances, Jennifer Kowalski's backpack. We were right back where we'd started. "This isn't real," Savannah said, her voice tight with panic. "This violates every natural law. Trails don't form loops. The topography doesn't support it." I pulled out my GPS unit, something I should have thought to check earlier. But when I turned it on, the screen showed only static. No satellite signal, no coordinates, nothing but digital noise. "They're jamming that too," Savannah said. "They can't jam GPS, that's satellite-based, it's global infrastructure. You'd need government-level resources to—" I stopped because I heard footsteps again. They were coming from multiple directions, converging on the clearing, and this time there were more of them, many more. The first man stepped out of the trees again, that same slight smile on his face. "Welcome back. I told you the pattern corrects itself." Behind him, more figures emerged. I counted at least 8 people, maybe more. All of them dressed like ordinary hikers, all of them moving with that same measured precision. "What did you do to the trail?" I demanded. "Nothing," he said. "The trail is exactly as it's always been. You're just seeing it clearly for the first time. The true structure underneath the apparent geography." "That's impossible." "Is it? Or have you just never encountered anything like this before?" He gestured to the collection in the center of the clearing. "The objects create the pattern. The pattern shapes the space, and the space contains what it needs to contain." "You're describing something that doesn't exist," Savannah said. Some kind of supernatural trap. That's not real." "I never said it was supernatural," the man replied. "I said it was a pattern. Patterns exist in nature. Patterns exist in mathematics. Why couldn't a pattern exist in geography if it was maintained properly?" One of the other figures, an older woman with gray hair, spoke up. "Every item in the collection is a fixed point. Together, they create a structure. Within that structure, certain rules apply. Different rules than the ones you're used to. You're telling us this place is some kind of, what, dimensional pocket? Temporal anomaly?" I couldn't believe I was even entertaining this insanity, but I also couldn't deny what we'd experienced. "I'm telling you, it's a pattern," the first man said. "And patterns, once established, are very difficult to break." "What do you want from us?" Savannah asked. "The same thing the pattern wants. Understanding, acceptance, a choice." He nodded toward the collection. "You can become part of the pattern. Contribute your items. Add your essence to the structure. Many have made that choice, consciously or unconsciously. Or, I prompted, or you can keep trying to leave. Keep walking the trails that lead back here. Keep running in circles until exhaustion and dehydration make the choice for you." He paused. "Those are your options. There are no others." I looked at Savannah. She was pale, her hand gripping her weapon so tightly her knuckles had gone white. We were being offered a false choice. I knew that. But I also knew that we needed time to think, to plan, to find a real way out of this impossible situation. "If we join your pattern," I said slowly, "what happens to us?" "You continue," the man said. "But differently. Your perspective shifts. You see things as they truly are, not as you've been conditioned to see them. You become a maintainer, like us, a guardian of the structure. And if we refuse," he shrugged, "then eventually you become part of it anyway. Everyone who stays in the pattern long enough does. It's just a question of whether you do it willingly or not." "You're describing imprisonment," Savannah said. "Forced captivity. I'm describing inevitability. You're already in the pattern, Officer Howe. You have been since the first time you cataloged one of the objects. Every measurement you took, every photograph you made, it pulled you deeper into the structure, made you part of it." I thought about Savannah's notebooks, her meticulous documentation of everything we'd found. Had that been her natural tendency toward precision? Or had something about the objects themselves been influencing her behavior, drawing her into their pattern? "We need time," I said, "to think about this, to discuss our options." The man nodded. "Of course. Time works differently here anyway. You have as much as you need." He gestured to the others, and they began to withdraw back into the trees. "We'll be nearby. Call out when you've made your decision." They disappeared into the forest, and Savannah and I were left alone in the clearing with the spiral of objects and the weight of an impossible choice. "We're not joining their cult," Savannah said immediately. "Whatever this is, whoever they are, we're not becoming part of it." Agreed, but we also need to face facts. We've tried to leave twice and ended up back here both times. Our radios don't work. Our GPS doesn't work. We're effectively trapped. There has to be a way out. There's always a way out. I wanted to believe her, but I'd seen what I'd seen. 2 trails that shouldn't have led back to this clearing, but did. Geography that didn't make sense. A space that followed rules I didn't understand. "The objects," I said suddenly. "They said the objects create the pattern. What if we destroy them? Break the structure? There are hundreds of them. It would take hours to collect and remove them all. Then, we don't remove them. We scatter them, break the spiral, disrupt the pattern. Maybe that's enough." It was a thin hope, but it was something. We approached the collection carefully, and I picked up the first item I could reach. A button, just like the one we'd found at the start of the trail months ago. The moment my fingers closed around it, I felt something. A pull, like a magnetic force, drawing my hand toward the center of the spiral. I resisted it, tossed the button as far as I could toward the tree line. Nothing happened. The button landed in the leaves, the spiral remained intact, and the world didn't shift or change. "Try another one," Savannah urged. I picked up a coin, then a key, then a watch. I threw each one in different directions, scattering them away from the collection. Savannah joined me, and together we started to dismantle the spiral. We'd removed maybe 20 items when I heard it. A sound like metal scraping on stone, coming from all around us. The temperature dropped suddenly, my breath fogging in the air despite the May warmth. And then they came. Not the people we'd been talking to, something else. Shapes that moved through the trees, indistinct and wrong in a way that made my eyes hurt to look at them. They didn't walk so much as flow, like smoke or water, but with a purposefulness that was distinctly predatory. "Savannah," I whispered, "we need to stop." But she was already seeing them, her face gone white with terror. The shapes were moving toward the clearing from all sides, drawn by what we'd done, by the disruption we'd caused. The first man's voice called out from the trees, "I warned you. The pattern corrects itself." The shapes reached the edge of the clearing and stopped. They were waiting, I realized. Waiting for us to make a choice. Keep destroying the pattern and face whatever these things were, or put the objects back and accept our place in the structure. I picked up the items I'd thrown, placed them carefully back into the spiral. Savannah did the same. With each object returned, the temperature rose slightly, and the shapes retreated a few feet. When the last item was back in place, the shapes disappeared completely. "What were those?" Savannah asked, her voice shaking. "Whatever maintains the pattern when the human elements fail," I said. "The enforcement mechanism." We sat down on the edge of the clearing, both of us exhausted and terrified. We'd tried to escape twice and failed. We'd tried to destroy the pattern and been stopped. We were trapped in this place with no clear way out. "There has to be something we're missing," Savannah said. "Some detail, some aspect of this that we haven't considered." I pulled out the notebook we'd taken from Jennifer's backpack and started reading through it again, looking for anything that might help us understand this place, this pattern, this impossible trap we'd walked into. And then I found it. A single sentence written in different handwriting from the rest, added as a note in the margin. "The pattern cannot hold what it cannot categorize." I showed it to Savannah. "What do you think that means?" She thought about it. "The objects, they're all personal items, things that can be identified, cataloged, associated with specific people. What if that's the key? What if the pattern can only trap people who've been incorporated into it through their belongings? But we have been incorporated. Our badge, our photograph, they're part of the collection now. Are they, though?" She stood up, excited despite our situation. "Think about it. They threw those items into the clearing, but we never added them to the spiral. They're not part of the pattern yet. They're just there." I saw where she was going. "So, if we remove our items before they can be properly incorporated, maybe the pattern can't hold us. It's worth a try. What have we got to lose at this point?" We searched the clearing, looking for the badge and photograph that had been thrown into it. It took several minutes, but we found them both, partially buried in leaves near the western edge. I picked up the badge, expecting that same pulling sensation I'd felt with the other objects. But there was nothing. It was just a piece of metal in my hand, no different from the real badge on my belt. "It's a copy," I said. "They made copies of our things, but they're not actually ours. The pattern can't incorporate us using duplicates." Then we haven't been trapped after all, Savannah said. We've been fooled into thinking we are. It was a thin distinction, but it felt important. The pattern worked on belief as much as reality. These people had made us believe we were trapped, and that belief had kept us from seeing the way out. One more try, I said. We walk out together, and this time we don't doubt. We don't let them convince us the trail leads back here. We chose the southern route again, the way we'd originally come in. But this time, as we walked, we talked. About anything and everything except where we were and what we'd experienced. Baseball scores, movies we'd seen, what we were planning to have for dinner. Mundane conversation that anchored us to reality, to the normal world outside this clearing. The trail descended. We crossed the small creek. We passed familiar landmarks, but we didn't comment on them, didn't let ourselves wonder if we'd seen them before. And then, impossibly, wonderfully, we saw artificial light ahead. The parking area, the southern trailhead, the real world. We practically ran the last 100 yards. When we emerged from the forest, 3 ranger trucks were waiting in the parking area. Our backup finally arrived. One of the rangers, a guy named Mike Sanderson, rushed over when he saw us. "Thank God, we've been searching for 2 hours. Where have you been?" "Long story," I said. "But we need to go back in there with full support. Search and rescue, maybe FBI. There are people in that clearing, and I think they're connected to the missing hikers." Mike looked confused. "What clearing? You said you were on the Nulhagen Spur." "We were. About 1.5 miles up, there's a clearing with a spiral pattern of objects, and people, at least 8 of them." "Leslie, there's no clearing on the Nulhagen Spur. The trail doesn't have any significant open areas. We've mapped every inch of it." Savannah pulled out her GPS unit. It was working now, showing our exact coordinates. She scrolled back through the recorded track of our hike. According to the GPS, we'd walked the entire length of the Nulhagen Spur without deviating from the trail. No clearing, no spiral. We'd simply walked 3 miles north, then 3 miles back south. "That's not possible," I said. "We were there for hours. We talked to people. We found evidence." "What evidence?" Mike asked. Savannah reached into her pack for the notebook we'd taken from Jennifer's backpack. But when she pulled it out, it wasn't a notebook at all. It was just a trail map, folded and weathered, exactly like the laminated map we'd found as one of the objects. I checked my pockets for the duplicate badge I'd picked up in the clearing. Nothing. It was gone, if it had ever existed at all. "We were there," Savannah insisted. "We both saw the same thing. The objects, the people, the clearing. It was real." Mike exchanged a glance with the other rangers. "Look, you two have been under a lot of stress. The Kowalski case, the long hours. Sometimes the mind plays tricks when you're exhausted and scared." "This wasn't our minds playing tricks," I said. But even as I said it, I felt doubt creeping in. Because if the clearing didn't exist on GPS, if the notebook had transformed back into a map, if there was no physical evidence of anything we'd experienced, then what had we actually encountered? The investigation into the missing hikers continued, but without any new leads, it eventually went cold. Savannah transferred to a different forest a month later. We stayed in touch for a while, but eventually our messages grew less frequent, and then stopped altogether. I retired from the Forest Service 6 months after that day on the Nulhagen Spur, took an early retirement package, and moved to a small town in Georgia where the forests are different, flatter, less oppressive. But sometimes, on nights when I can't sleep, I pull up Google Earth on my computer and look at satellite imagery of the Talladega National Forest. I zoom in on the Nulhagen Spur, following the trail from south to north. And sometimes, if the image quality is good and the resolution is high enough, I can see it. A small clearing about 1.5 miles up the trail. You have to know exactly where to look, and you have to want to see it. In the center of the clearing, if you zoom in far enough, you can make out a pattern. A spiral of small objects, barely visible from satellite altitude. I've never told anyone about this. Never showed anyone else where to look, because some patterns, once you see them, you can't unsee. And some places are better left unfound. The Nulhagen Spur is still open to hikers, and every so often I hear about someone going missing on that trail. Someone experienced, someone careful, someone who should have known better. And I wonder if they noticed the objects, if they counted the paces, if they followed the pattern all the way to its center. And I wonder if they're still there, in that clearing that exists and doesn't exist, maintaining a structure that shouldn't be possible but undeniably is. 48 paces between each marker, line of sight distance, just close enough to follow, just far enough to feel safe, until you're not safe anymore, until you're part of the collection. My name is Dean Hollowell, and I worked as a senior ranger in the William B. Bankhead National Forest for 19 years before I took early retirement last fall. When people ask why I left, I tell them it was time for a change, that I wanted to spend more time with my family. That's true enough, but it's not the whole truth. The whole truth involves something I found in the deep woods during the winter of last year, something that still doesn't make sense no matter how many times I've tried to explain it away. I came across your channel a few weeks ago while I was having trouble sleeping, and I've listened to enough of your stories to know that sometimes the forest shows us things that don't fit into the neat categories we use to understand the world. Before I tell you what happened, you need to understand the Bankhead. It's not like the popular national parks out west with their visitor centers and guided tours. The Bankhead is working forest. Over 180,000 acres of dense woodland in northwest Alabama that's been logged, regrown, and logged again over the past century. We get hunters in the fall, some hikers in the spring, but most of the year it's just empty. Miles and miles of pine and hardwood, with nothing human about it except the old logging roads that cut through the terrain like scars. My partner during that final winter was Wyatt Pennington, 27 years old, former Army, the kind of guy who took everything seriously and by the book. He'd been with the Forest Service for 3 years, and I'd been training him on the backcountry patrol routes. The Bankhead has sections that are so remote you might not see another person for days, and Wyatt wanted to learn them all. It was mid-January when we found the first trap. We were doing a routine check of the old Corinth Road area, which runs through some of the densest pine forest in the southern section. The temperature was in the low 30s, cold for Alabama, and the ground was hard with frost. Wyatt spotted it first, about 20 feet off the trail in a small clearing. "Dean, you seeing this?" I walked over to where he was standing. It was a leg-hold trap, the old-fashioned kind with iron jaws and a chain staked to the ground. Steel-jawed traps like that had been illegal in Alabama for decades, so finding one wasn't entirely unusual. Poachers still used them sometimes, and we'd confiscate them whenever we found them. But this trap was different. For one thing, it was spotlessly clean. No rust, no dirt, no oxidation on the metal. It looked like it had been placed there that morning, but what really caught my attention was what was inside the jaws. Pine branches. Fresh-cut pine branches, still green, carefully arranged inside the closed trap. Not caught accidentally, not placed randomly. Someone had deliberately filled the trap with cut branches and then triggered it shut. "That's weird," Wyatt said, which was an understatement. I examined the trap more closely. The branches had been stripped of their needles and cut to identical lengths, maybe 8 inches each. There were 12 of them, stacked parallel to each other inside the jaws. The precision of it bothered me. "Could be kids messing around," Wyatt suggested. Teenagers from one of the towns, playing some kind of game. 20 miles from the nearest town? I shook my head. And this trap is old, maybe 40 years old. Where would kids even find something like this? We bagged the trap as evidence and continued our patrol. Over the next 2 hours, we found 3 more traps, all identical. All spotlessly clean, all filled with precisely cut pine branches, all triggered shut. They were spaced about a quarter-mile apart, forming a rough line that ran parallel to Corinth Road. By the time we got back to the ranger station, it was late afternoon and the temperature was dropping fast. I filed a report documenting the traps and their locations, noting the unusual condition they were in and the strange contents. "Think there are more of them?" Wyatt asked as we were packing up for the day. "Probably," I said. That pattern seemed deliberate. 4 traps in a line, same spacing. Whoever placed them might have put out more that we didn't find. Why would someone do that, though? What's the point? I didn't have an answer. Poachers set traps to catch game. Hunters used them illegally sometimes because they were effective and required less skill than actual hunting. But traps filled with cut branches served no purpose I could identify. That night, I stayed late at the station, going through old reports to see if anyone had documented similar findings. I found 3 incidents over the past 10 years where traps had been discovered in unusual configurations, but nothing quite like what we'd seen. No mentions of pine branches or that kind of precise arrangement. I drove home around 9 p.m., taking the back road that runs along the eastern edge of the forest. It's a 20-minute drive through mostly empty countryside, and I've done it so many times that I barely pay attention anymore. But that night, about halfway home, I heard something that made me pull over. A bell. A clear, metallic ringing coming from somewhere in the forest to my right. Not a wind chime. Not that kind of tinny sound. This was deeper, more resonant, like an old church bell or a ship's bell. I turned off my engine and rolled down the window, listening. The bell rang again. 3 measured strikes, then silence. Then 3 more strikes, same rhythm, same interval. There was no wind. The trees stood perfectly still in the cold January air, their branches black against the stars. But the bell kept ringing, those same 3 strikes repeated over and over. I got out of my truck and walked to the edge of the road, trying to pinpoint the direction. The sound seemed to come from deep in the forest, maybe a quarter-mile in, right around where we'd found those traps. The bell rang one more time, then stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. No crickets, no owls, no rustling leaves, just a stillness that felt heavy and wrong. I waited for maybe 5 minutes, listening for any other sound. Nothing. Eventually, I got back in my truck and drove home, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd heard something I wasn't supposed to hear. The next morning, Wyatt and I headed back to the Corinth Road area. I told him about the bell over the radio, and he'd agreed we should check the location where I thought the sound had originated. We parked at the same spot as the previous day and hiked in, following our GPS coordinates from where we'd found the traps. The morning was clear and cold, frost still clinging to the shaded areas. We found the trap locations easily enough, but the traps themselves were gone. All 4 of them removed completely. No signs that they'd ever been there except for the shallow depressions in the ground where they'd been staked. "Someone came back for them," Wyatt said. "Last night," I added. "Had to be last night. They weren't here after dark and they're gone now." We expanded our search, moving in a grid pattern away from where the traps had been. That's when I found the hanging metal piece. It was suspended from a pine branch about 10 feet off the ground, tied with what looked like thin wire. A flat piece of metal, roughly rectangular, maybe 6 inches by 4 inches. It had been polished clean, and someone had used a sharp tool to carve words into its surface. They didn't come willingly. I stared at those words for a long time. The letters were careful and precise, carved deep enough that they'd last for years. The metal itself looked like it might have come from a roof or a vehicle, something that had been cut and shaped for this specific purpose. "What does that mean?" Wyatt asked. "I don't know." "Should we take it down?" I thought about it. "Photograph it first, document everything. Then we take it down." Wyatt took photos from multiple angles while I examined the surrounding area. There were no footprints in the frost, no disturbed undergrowth, no indication of how someone had gotten here or hung the metal without leaving any trace. After we'd documented everything, I climbed up and cut the wire. The metal piece was heavier than it looked, and when I turned it over, I found more writing on the back. The red deer, remember. Wyatt and I looked at each other. "There are no red deer in Alabama," he said. He was right. Red deer are European, found in places like Scotland and Germany. White-tailed deer are what we have in Alabama, and they're plentiful in the Bankhead. "Maybe it's symbolic," I suggested. "A reference to something else." We bagged the metal piece and continued searching the area. Over the next hour, we found 2 more hanging pieces of metal, both with messages carved into them. "The forest keeps count. 12 branches for 12 debts." Each one was hung from a different tree, each one polished clean and precisely carved. And like the first, none of them had any footprints or disturbance around them, as if they'd simply appeared overnight. By noon, we'd covered about a square mile and found 7 metal pieces total, all with cryptic messages, all hung with wire, all positioned along that same line we'd traced with the traps the day before. Back at the station, I laid out all the metal pieces on a table and photographed them together. The messages, when read in the order we'd found them, formed a kind of narrative. They didn't come willingly. The red deer, remember. The forest keeps count. 12 branches for 12 debts. Each trap springs only once. The bells mark the passage. Return what was taken. "This is someone's art project," Wyatt said, studying the pieces. "Has to be. Some kind of installation in the woods. Environmental art or whatever." "Environmental art that involves illegal traps," I pointed out. "Okay, so it's weird environmental art, but it's still just art, right? Someone making a statement about hunting or deforestation or something." I wanted to believe that. It would have been the easiest explanation. But something about the whole situation felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. The precision of everything, the cleaned branches, the polished metal, the fact that whoever was doing this could come and go without leaving any trace. And then there were the bells. "I'm going back tonight," I said. "I want to hear if those bells ring again." Wyatt looked at me like I was crazy. "It's going to be below freezing. You're going to sit in the woods in the dark just to maybe hear some bells?" "Yeah." "I'm coming with you then. You're too old to be wandering around in the cold by yourself." I should have told him no. Should have insisted this was something I needed to check on alone. But the truth was, I didn't want to be out there by myself. We returned to the Corinth Road area at 7 p.m., an hour after sunset. The temperature was already dropping into the low 20s, and our breath fogged in the beam of our flashlights. We found a spot about 100 yards from where we'd found the metal pieces and settled in to wait. The forest at night is never truly silent, but it's a different kind of sound than during the day. Branches creaking, animals moving through underbrush, the occasional owl call. Your ears adjust to it, learn to filter out the natural sounds and focus on anything that seems wrong. We waited for 2 hours without hearing anything unusual. I was starting to think the bells had been a one-time occurrence when Wyatt grabbed my arm. "You hear that?" I listened. At first, I couldn't hear anything different. Then I caught it. A faint metallic ringing, so soft I almost missed it. 3 strikes, pause, 3 strikes, pause. The pattern was the same as the night before, but the sound was coming from a different direction. Not from where the traps had been, but from deeper in the forest, maybe half a mile to the north. "We should check it out," Wyatt said. I hesitated. Night navigation in dense forest is dangerous even with flashlights and GPS. Lots of ways to get turned around or injured. But the bells kept ringing. That steady 3-strike pattern. And I knew if we didn't investigate now, we might not get another chance. "Stay close," I said. "We stick together, and if anything feels wrong, we head straight back." We started walking toward the sound, using our flashlights sparingly to preserve our night vision. The bells continued ringing, always the same pattern, always seeming to be just a bit farther than we expected. After maybe 20 minutes of walking, we came to a clearing I'd never seen before. And I'd been patrolling these woods for 19 years, knew every major landmark and trail. But this clearing wasn't on any map. It was roughly circular, maybe 40 feet across, surrounded by tall pines. In the center was a structure made of branches. Not random deadfall, but deliberately constructed, like a miniature cabin made entirely of pine logs stacked in a careful pattern. And hanging from the structure were bells. Dozens of them, all different sizes, suspended on wires so they hung at different heights. There was no wind, but they were moving slightly, ringing with that same 3-strike pattern we'd been hearing. "What the hell is this?" Wyatt whispered. I had no answer. We approached slowly, our flashlights illuminating the structure. As we got closer, I could see that the pine logs weren't just stacked randomly. They were arranged in groups of 12, each group tied together with what looked like stripped bark. And inside the structure, barely visible through gaps in the logs, were more of those metal pieces. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all hanging from the internal framework like wind chimes. Wyatt walked around the perimeter, studying it from different angles. This took time. Serious time. Someone's been coming out here for weeks, maybe months, building this. "Look at the ground," I said. The clearing floor was covered in pine needles, but beneath them I could see patterns. Lines scratched into the dirt, forming shapes I didn't recognize. Not letters or numbers, but symbols that seemed almost decorative. The bells chimed again. That 3-strike pattern. And this time I realized they weren't moving from wind. They were being struck. Something inside the structure was hitting them deliberately. "We should leave," I said suddenly. "Right now." Wyatt turned to me. "What? Why?" "Because we're not alone." He heard it then, too. Movement inside the structure, something shifting among the stacked logs. Not animal movement, too deliberate for that. Something human-sized, moving with purpose. We both drew our flashlights up, illuminating the structure's interior. For a moment, I saw a face. Or something like a face. Pale and smooth, without features I could quite focus on, staring at us from between the logs. Then it was gone, and I wasn't sure I'd seen anything at all. "Dean," Wyatt said, his voice tight. "What was that?" "I don't know. But we're leaving now." We backed away from the structure, keeping our lights on it, watching for any more movement. The bells continued ringing, that same rhythm, as we retreated toward the tree line. When we were about 20 yards away, something else happened. The bells stopped, all at once, mid-ring. The silence was sudden and complete. And then, from inside the structure, I heard a voice, not speaking words I could understand, but making sounds that seemed to form a pattern. It was rhythmic, almost like a chant, rising and falling in pitch. "Run," I said. We ran. We made it back to our truck in maybe 15 minutes, crashing through undergrowth and low branches without caring about the noise. When we reached the road, we were both breathing hard, our faces scratched from pine needles and thorns. Neither of us spoke during the drive back to the station. What could we say? That we'd found some kind of shrine in the woods? That someone or something was living in a structure made of pine logs? That we'd heard voices and seen faces that shouldn't exist? At the station, I started writing up a report, but I couldn't figure out how to document what we'd experienced. If I wrote down exactly what we'd seen and heard, it would sound like we'd lost our minds. But if I left out the important details, the report would be useless. Wyatt sat across from me, staring at his own blank report form. We both saw that, right? The face in the logs. We saw something, I said carefully. But what? A person? A squatter living in the woods? Maybe. But I didn't believe it. The face hadn't looked right. The proportions were wrong. The features too smooth and undefined. It was like looking at a mannequin face, or a mask. We need to go back, Wyatt said. In daylight, with backup, document that structure properly, search it, figure out who or what is out there. I wanted to agree. That would have been the logical next step, the professional thing to do. But something stopped me. A feeling I couldn't quite name, like we'd already pushed too far, seen too much. Let me think about it, I said. I'll talk to the supervisor tomorrow, see what he wants to do. But that night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about the structure, the bells, the voice, and those words carved into the metal. Return what was taken. What had been taken? From whom? The next morning, I drove back to the Corinth Road area alone. I didn't tell Wyatt, didn't radio in my location. I just needed to see the structure in daylight. Needed to confirm it was real and not some shared hallucination we'd experienced in the dark. I parked at the same spot and hiked in, following the GPS coordinates I'd saved. The morning was overcast and warmer, maybe mid-40s, with a damp breeze that made the pine branches sway. It took me almost an hour to reach the clearing. I remembered it being closer, but in daylight the terrain looked different, unfamiliar. I had to circle around twice before I found the right approach. When I finally reached the clearing, I stopped at the tree line. The structure was still there, but it had changed. The pine logs were arranged differently now, stacked in a new configuration that formed what looked like a doorway. The bells were gone, or at least I couldn't see them anymore, and the metal pieces that had been hanging inside were now arranged on the ground in a circle around the structure, all facing inward. I approached slowly, my hand on my sidearm. In daylight, the structure looked less threatening, more like an elaborate art installation. But the precision of the construction was even more apparent. Every log was the same diameter, cut to exact lengths, positioned with mathematical accuracy. I walked around the perimeter, photographing everything. The metal pieces on the ground each had different messages. Some I recognized from the ones we'd collected. Others new. The count is incomplete. 3 remain unaccounted. The red deer demand balance. 12 for 12, branch for bone. That last one made my skin crawl. Branch for bone. Like the pine branches we'd found in the traps were substitutes for something else. For someone. I was about to enter the structure when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, drawing my weapon. A man stood at the edge of the clearing, tall, maybe 60 years old, wearing old hunting clothes and a wool cap. His face was weathered and deeply lined, his eyes pale blue and unblinking. "You shouldn't be here," he said. His voice was rough, like he didn't use it often. "Forest Service," I replied, keeping my weapon pointed at the ground but ready. "This is federal land. I need to ask you some questions." "Questions won't help you," the man said. "Questions just make it worse." "Make what worse?" He gestured at the structure. "This, all of this. They built it, and now it has to be fed. Who built it? Who are they? The man smiled, but there was no humor in it. People who thought they could take without giving back. People who thought the forest didn't notice, but the red deer notice. The red deer always notice. There are no red deer in Alabama, I said, repeating what Wyatt had told me. Aren't there? The man took a step closer. You found the traps. You heard the bells. You saw the faces in the logs. And you still think you know what's in these woods? I think you're trespassing on federal land, I said, my hand moving to my radio. And I think you're going to need to come with me to answer some questions. The man's expression didn't change. Can't do that. I have work to finish. What work? Feeding the structure. 12 branches for 12 debts. That's the price. That's always been the price. He turned and walked back toward the tree line. I should have followed him, should have detained him for questioning. But something about the way he moved, the certainty in his voice, made me hesitate. By the time I decided to pursue, he'd disappeared into the trees. I searched the area for 20 minutes but found no trace of him. No footprints, no disturbed vegetation, nothing to indicate he'd ever been there. I radioed the station, reported the encounter, and requested backup. While I waited, I continued documenting the structure, taking measurements and more photographs. That's when I noticed the patterns scratched into the ground. In daylight, I could see them more clearly. They weren't random symbols, they were maps. Crude, topographical representations of the surrounding forest with specific points marked and connected by lines. I recognized some of the landmarks. Corinth Road, the creek that ran through the southern section, the old fire tower on the eastern ridge. But there were other marks I didn't recognize, points in the forest where I'd never been. And at each marked point, someone had carved a small symbol. It took me a moment to realize what it represented. A leg-hold trap. There were 12 of them marked on the map. When backup arrived, 2 rangers I knew from the northern district, we searched the structure thoroughly. We found more metal pieces, more carved messages, all variations on the same themes. Debts, balance, the red deer, 12 for 12. We also found something else. Hidden beneath the lowest layer of logs, wrapped in what looked like very old canvas, were bones. Not animal bones. Human bones. Small ones. The kind that might come from hands or feet. We called in the county sheriff, who called in the state police, who eventually called in the FBI. The clearing became a crime scene, cordoned off with yellow tape that looked absurd strung between the ancient pines. The forensic team spent 3 days cataloging everything. The bones were confirmed as human from at least 3 different individuals, all showing signs of having been in the ground for decades. The metal pieces were analyzed and found to be from various sources: roofing material, vehicle panels, old farm equipment, all cut and shaped by hand. But they couldn't find any evidence of who'd built the structure or left the messages. No DNA, no fingerprints, no fibers that could be traced. It was as if the whole thing had been constructed by ghosts. The FBI agent in charge, a woman named Martinez who'd driven up from Birmingham, interviewed me extensively about the encounter with the old man. "You said he told you he had work to finish," she said, "feeding the structure. What do you think he meant by that?" "I don't know," I admitted. "At the time, I thought he was just disturbed, rambling. But now I think maybe he meant it literally, that something about this structure requires maintenance. Offerings, maybe." Martinez didn't write that down. "Mr. Hollowell, I need to ask you something directly. Do you believe there's something supernatural about what you found?" I thought carefully about how to answer. I believe there are things in these woods I can't explain. Whether that makes them supernatural or just unexplained, I couldn't say. She closed her notebook. "We're going to classify this as a historical site with potential criminal activity. The bones need to be investigated, obviously, but given their age, it's likely whoever left them there is long dead. As for the structure and the messages without evidence of recent illegal activity, there's not much we can do. What about the traps we found? The clean ones filled with branches. Those are gone, Mr. Hollowell. You documented them, but you didn't secure them as evidence. And without the physical objects, we just have your report. She was right, and I knew it. We'd bagged the first 4 traps, but then they'd disappeared. And we hadn't found any others, despite the map scratched into the clearing floor suggesting there were 12 total. The FBI closed their investigation after 2 weeks. The bones were determined to be from the 1950s or 60s, too old to pursue as an active case. The structure was documented, photographed, and then dismantled by the forensic team. All the metal pieces were taken as evidence, and the logs were scattered. The clearing was left empty, just another anonymous space in the endless Alabama forest. But I knew it wasn't over, because 3 nights after the FBI left, I heard the bells again. This time, I didn't tell anyone. I just drove out to Corinth Road around midnight and parked in my usual spot. The temperature had dropped again, and my breath formed clouds in the still air. I hiked in alone, using only a small flashlight to navigate. I wasn't sure where I was going, wasn't even sure what I hoped to find. But the bells were ringing somewhere in the darkness, and I needed to understand why. The clearing where the structure had been was empty, just as the forensic team had left it. But the bells weren't coming from there. They were coming from deeper in the forest along one of the points I'd seen marked on the scratched map. I followed the sound for maybe 30 minutes, moving carefully through the dark woods. The bells stopped and started unpredictably, sometimes ringing for a full minute, sometimes just a single chime. Eventually, I came to a small ravine I'd never noticed before. It was narrow, maybe 6 feet wide, with steep sides that dropped about 15 feet. At the bottom, barely visible in my flashlight beam, was another structure. This one was smaller, cruder, made of branches that looked older and more weathered. But the basic design was the same. Logs stacked in careful patterns, with spaces between them, and something hanging from the internal framework. Not bells this time. Bones. I climbed down into the ravine, using exposed roots and rocks as handholds. At the bottom, the air smelled different. Damp earth and decay, but also something else, something metallic and sharp. The structure was maybe 6 feet tall and 4 feet on each side, a perfect cube of stacked branches. The bones hanging inside were definitely human. I could see a skull, several long bones, what looked like a complete rib cage. All of them were old, yellowed with age, strung together with rusted wire. And carved into the branches themselves, barely visible in my flashlight beam, were more messages. The first debt, 1952. The forest remembers names. I was reaching for my radio to call this in when I heard movement above me, at the rim of the ravine. Multiple footsteps approaching from different directions. "Dean Hollowell," a voice called down. I recognized it as the old man I'd encountered before. "You keep coming back. That's good. That means you understand." I pointed my flashlight up, but the beam wasn't strong enough to reach the top of the ravine. I could see shapes moving up there, silhouettes against the stars, but I couldn't make out details. "Understand what?" I called back. "The debt, the balance, 12 men took from the forest, took red deer that came down from the mountains, rare and sacred, shot them all, every one, for sport, for trophies, left their bodies to rot. Red deer aren't native to Alabama," I said, though my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. "They were once," the old man replied. "Long before your maps said different. Long before your laws said it was okay to take what you wanted. And when 12 men killed 12 deer, the forest demanded payment. Payment in the form of human bones, payment in the form of balance. 12 debts, 12 traps, 12 branches in each. One for one, life for life. The men are dead now, all of them. Been dead for decades, but the debt remains until it's properly marked, properly acknowledged. More shapes appeared at the rim of the ravine. I counted at least 6 people now, maybe more. All of them standing perfectly still, watching me. "Who are you people?" I asked. "Descendants," the old man said. "Children and grandchildren of the 12. We maintain the structures. We feed them with clean branches, keep them marked with metal, ring the bells when the forest requires acknowledgement. It's our burden, our inheritance." "That's insane," I said. "You're talking about a ritual murder cult." "We're talking about balance," the old man corrected. "Those men killed without respect, took without giving. The forest extracted payment, and we mark the debt so it's never forgotten, so it never happens again." I looked at the structure in front of me, at the bones hanging inside. These are the remains of the 12 men? Not all of them. Most were buried proper. These are pieces, tokens, enough to mark the debt and satisfy the accounting. And the branches and the traps? The 12 cut to identical lengths. Offerings, symbolic substitutes. We can't bring back the 12 deer, but we can offer 12 branches. 12 for 12, the pattern must be maintained. I was about to argue, to tell him this was all nonsense, when I heard something that stopped me cold. A sound I'd never heard before, not in 19 years of working in these woods. A bugling call, deep and resonant, echoing through the ravine. The sound a bull elk makes during rut, or the sound a red deer makes. The old man's voice came down from above, softer now. "They're still here, you know, the red deer. Not many, but enough. They remember what was taken. They remember the debt, and they won't forget until the balance is maintained." The bugling came again, closer this time. I swung my flashlight toward the sound but saw only trees and darkness. "You can leave now," the old man said. "You've seen what you needed to see. You understand the pattern. Just don't interfere with the maintenance. Don't disturb the structures. And don't tell anyone who wouldn't understand." "I'm a federal law enforcement officer," I said. "I have to report this." "Report what? Bones that have been in the ground for 70 years? Structures made of deadfall? Messages carved in scrap metal? You already did that, and your FBI friend didn't find anything actionable." He was right. I'd already filed reports, already brought in investigators, and all they'd found was evidence of something old and strange, but nothing that constituted a current crime. "The 12 traps," I said. "The ones we found filled with branches. Where are they now?" "Moved. We relocate them every few months, keep the pattern fresh. You found 4 of them, which means you're observant. Most rangers walk right past them. And if I find them again, if I keep removing them, then we'll keep placing them. This isn't a battle you can win, Dean. This is just how things are in these woods. Have been for 70 years, will be for 70 more." The bugling call came again, and this time my flashlight caught something at the edge of its beam. A shape, too large to be a white-tailed deer, moving through the trees with deliberate grace. I saw antlers, broad and palmate, nothing like the antlers on Alabama deer. "Impossible," I whispered. "Is it?" the old man asked. "Or is it just something you didn't know was possible until tonight?" I heard the shapes above me moving away, footsteps receding into the forest. When I climbed out of the ravine, they were gone. I was alone in the dark woods, with nothing but my flashlight and the memory of that impossible bugling call. I hiked back to my truck and drove home. I didn't file a report, didn't call Wyatt or the FBI or anyone else. What would I say? That I'd found more bones? That I'd spoken to a cult that maintains forest shrines? That I'd heard a red deer in Alabama? None of it would help. None of it would change what was happening in those woods. 2 weeks later, I filed for early retirement. My supervisor tried to talk me out of it, said I had at least 5 more years before I needed to leave. But I was done. Done with those woods, done with whatever strange inheritance those 12 men had left behind. Wyatt took over my patrol routes. Last I heard, he's still finding things he can't explain. Structures made of careful patterns, metal pieces with messages, traps filled with cut branches. But he's learned not to report them anymore. Learned that some things in the forest are better left as they are, maintained by people who understand the debt better than we ever could. I still drive past the bankhead sometimes, look at those dense pine forests from the safety of my truck, and sometimes, usually in the early morning or late evening, I see them. Red deer, moving through the trees like ghosts, their broad antlers catching the light. Impossible and undeniable. The forest keeps its own accounting, and some debts can never be fully paid, only acknowledged, marked, and maintained through generations. 12 men took 12 deer, the forest took 12 men, and somewhere in those woods, the descendants of both continue the pattern, ringing bells, hanging metal, filling traps with carefully cut branches. 12 for 12, branch for bone. The red deer remember, and so do I.